Well, we'll call a meeting to order. It's 8:30 somewhere. I think we're going to run through a roll call first for today, since we have somebody missing. And I'm wondering if we've got anybody on the Zoom for, that should be in attendance.
No.
Oh. Okay, let's do roll call then.
Senator Beitman. Here. Senator Cooper. Here. Senator Rothfuss. Here. Senator Wasserberger. Here. Representative Bear.
Here.
Representative Burkhart. Here. Representative Duncan.
Excused, I guess.
Here. Here. Representative Ayer. Here. Representative Gray. Here. Representative Heiner. Here. Representative Sherwood. Here. Representative Western. Here. Chairman Anderson.
Here.
Co-Chairman Greer.
Absent.
Unexcused.
Unexcused. I don't think he's on Zoom. I don't think he's on there, is he? All right, we'll get right down to business because we're going to get done by noon today, they tell me. So Department of Environmental Quality, and we have some speakers here, I bet. Go ahead.
All right, good morning, Mr. Chairman, committee. My name's Todd Parfit. I'm the director of the Department of Environmental Quality, and with me here is Suzanne Ingalls, the administrator of the Solid and Hazardous Waste Division. And the first item that we'll be discussing is the draft Solid Waste Cease and Transfer Program funding update and report. But before we do that, I want to give a little bit of background on the program for those that aren't as familiar. This program began in 2013 when the legislature passed House Enrolled Act 114, and that created the Municipal Solid Waste Cease and Transfer Program. And under that program, the department works with the Office of State Lands and Investment to provide funding to eligible communities for either the cease or transfer operations of their facility for those that no longer want to take and manage municipal solid waste and transfer it to regional landfills. In December of 2013, the department prioritized projects for the program, which the legislature approved, and that list included 52 potentially eligible projects with a total cost of $96.2 million. In 2016, the legislature modified the program by removing a limitation of maximum of 75% funding through the cease and transfer program to allow up to 100% of project funding in situations where all reasonable sources of funding were exhausted. So the legislature has deposited over time a total of roughly $60 million into the cease and transfer program account. Of that, $49.5 million was in grants and $10.5 million was in loans. We submitted our annual report to the Legislative Service Office on October 12th. And Administrator Ingalls is going to walk you through the report and the draft bill.
Thank you, Director Parfit. Mr. Chairman, my name is Suzanne Ingalls, and I'm the administrator of the Solid and Hazardous Waste Division. As Director Parfit mentioned, I'm going to walk you through the report and highlight the changes that were made from the last report. You'll see that as of October this year, 32 projects have received funding. 11 of those are transfer stations, and 21 of them are landfill closures, for a total of $48.1 million. So that, with all of those projects funded, that remains with the current list in the report with 18 projects left on that list. There's 8 transfer stations with a projected estimate of 9.1 million and 10 closure projects with an estimate of 22.1 million for a total cost of 31.2. Now, there were 3 changes made to this list. 2 of the project estimated costs increased based on engineer estimates that the agency received, and 1 project was removed because it received funding, so it no longer needs to be on the list. A couple years ago, in 2020, the legislature created a specific project for carcass management with a specific amount of funds dedicated for that project of $100,000. The agency continues to promote the use of those funds. I think you can hear me a little bit better now. Continues to promote the use of those funds through seminars, trainings, outreach with operators. We have not received an application yet from an operator to use those funds. So this project goes back, or this program goes back until 2013. Multiple projects have been funded, like I mentioned, and some of those projects that have been completed, those entities have started to make loan repayments, specifically 12 entities making repayments of a total of 1.7 million, and those funds are going back into the cease and transfer account. The other good news to share is that 10 projects were completed under budget for a total of $3 million, also going back into the account. So to date, there is a balance in the cease and transfer account of $16.5 million with 9.5 in grants and about 7 million in loans. One item that I do want to point out is that based on the remaining projects on the list and their current estimated cost, the total cost of all of these projects equals 79.3 million, which is under the original estimated cost of 96.2, which Director Parfit pointed out earlier. So with that, that summarizes the report, and I'll move directly into the draft bill in front of you.
Question here.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Engels, looking at the list on page 2, I see a number of these communities are still on the list, and the estimated costs are still the same as they've been, frankly, for a number of years. Are the communities not doing what they need to do, or they're not done? And I'll just use my own community as an example. It's a transfer station. It's $780,000, and I think it's been that amount for the last 3 years that we've looked at this. Are they not doing what they need to do? I know they're transferring the waste. They're hauling it literally here to Casper. So with all these communities, what are they doing? You know.
Mr. Chairman, we have, thank you for the question. We have ongoing conversations with these communities, and it's a matter of timing of their schedules, their costs, when they make those decisions to come into the program and seek funds. Specifically for your community, I believe we changed that project from a closure project to a transfer station just last year or the year before. And that dollar amount has remained. We don't like to change these numbers unless we have a more concrete number from the entity or their engineer that's reflective of what they are going to do. I believe some of these costs will remain the same, but it's just a matter of the community getting their ducks in a row and coming in and submitting that application. So it does take additional work on their part and coordination and making sure that these numbers are accurately reflected.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Yep, go ahead.
So we've given the communities quite a bit of money. The state has to help them with this, and to me, it seems like they aren't using it. Should we put a time limit on the availability of the money? Use it or lose it within a certain length of time? Just an opinion, please.
Mr. Chairman, I'll start with, we did hit a snag at the last couple years with COVID and supply chain. issues with facilities coming in for funding. We've seen programs come in last year. We're anticipating, or entities come in last year. We're anticipating more coming in this year. I would expect the list to be reduced over the next few years. But you bring up a good point of the program overall and the life of the program and the timeliness of it.
Question, yeah. Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Following up on that, I would be concerned if we tried to expedite it by putting a deadline on, because I think at that point we probably raise costs of the projects relative to what we would do if we just had the as-needed approach that we've done in the past. At the same time, I think to address Representative Burkhart's concerns, maybe it would be good to check in with some of these folks that are at the top of the list and ask them for a plan. What is your timeline? When are we going to get this done? Because we've had it prioritized for quite a while, and if we don't know the answer to that question already, which we may for some, I think it would be beneficial to at least try and chart out the expenditure plan for these funds as the purchasing power is clearly eroding with regard to inflation. And I think we'd like a reasonable approach to expediting it, maybe not so much that we end up competing against ourselves. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, and I just would add to that, we have had those conversations internally about should this program sunset, and I don't know that we have a time frame for when that should happen, but for the reasons that Ms. Engels pointed out, with the inflation, with the COVID, kind of slowed things down a little bit, but we are looking at potential ideas regarding to what would be appropriate for sunset, keeping in mind that we also have, I think we said 16.5 million available in the program, but we have more needs than that. So we'll have to address the funding if we accelerate the cease and transfer programs. We'll have to address the funding issue that goes with that.
I have a question. If the community does a transfer station, don't they have a closure to do also? I noticed Thermopolis has a closure and a transfer. Don't most of them have that?
Mr. Chairman, most communities historically had a small local landfill, and they have closed, and we've addressed a lot of the closures. There's only, I told you the number and I've already forgotten it. So many closures left on the list. We've funded 21 landfill closure projects already with the cease and transfer program. So we've been working our way through those closures. Some of the landfills, those communities closed their landfill prior to the creation of this program, so they never made this list.
Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you. Moving into the bill, I'm just going to move this report over. Section 1 of the bill on page 2 includes that program priority list of those 18 projects remaining. It captures the 8 transfer stations, the 10 closures, and it also reflects the increased cost of those 2 projects. Section 2, that starts on page 6, line 5, repeals the previous priority list that was in effect from last year, and because we have this new updated list. And section 3 makes the priority list effective immediately upon becoming law.
Good review. Yes. Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Engels, you've mentioned that the carcass management program has been out there for 2 years now with no real interest from our communities. Why should we continue funding that if we have no interest and it's not being utilized?
Mr. Chairman, we we've had discussions with communities. We just haven't received an application for use of the funds. I think there's still a need for the opportunity for them to use this. I think it's a good opportunity for them to come up with a way to potentially compost animals instead of transporting them to a regional landfill or buy the necessary infrastructure, the equipment needed to transfer them would be beneficial. And with a new dedicated set of funds, takes a little bit of brainstorming of who can use it, how can it be used, and making it effective. So I think there's
Yes,
still
go
value
ahead.
there.
Representative Heiner.
So Ms. Ingles, we've had 2 years and they're still not interested, or they're still not moving forward on this. How long do you expect to continue with this carrot out there to see if anyone will actually take it?
Mr. Chairman, I think another couple years, that might sound like a long amount of time, but talking with staff, there's interest that we received just earlier this month on how to use these funds from a specific entity. So we'd like to be able to offer that assistance to them instead of not.
I think we might have a need in some places, as long as we don't have crossovers or underpasses for the animals to cross, might still be used. But I would hope at some point in time, we've got enough access for them to not go across the highway, and might save that carcass issue.
Yes, I think that's, Mr. Chairman, another good consideration.
Other questions? Other questions? Other questions? Hearing none, thank you. Thank you for the wrap-up. We're going to go ahead and pass this since we need to. Yeah. Is there anyone else that would like to speak on cease and transfer? Is there anybody in the public or any on the Zoom that would like to speak to cease and transfer?
Mr. Chairman, I see Travis Deepak coming.
Oh, I bet he wants to speak on,
I think he's here for
I
cease
bet
and
he wants to
transfer.
speak on cease and transfer, yeah.
Okay.
He's the only one coming. Mr. Chairman, he wants to mine for garbage.
All right, we'll close public testimony and what's your pleasure?
Move the bill.
Moved and seconded by, pardon me? I think they got it. All right, any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? Hearing none, sensing you're ready to vote, roll call would be in order.
This is a roll call vote for 23 LSO 277 Solid Waste Cease and Transfer Program funding. Senator Beitman. Senator Cooper.
Excused. He'll be right back.
Senator Rothfuss. Senator Wasserberger.
Aye.
Representative Bear.
Aye.
Representative Burkhart.
Aye.
Representative Duncan.
Aye.
Representative Ayer.
There she is.
Representative Gray. Representative Heiner. Representative Sherwood. Representative Western. Co-Chairman Greer excused. Chairman Anderson.
Aye.
13 aye.
So that bill squeaks by. Welcome, Representative Duncan. We're glad to see you today. All right, moving right along to source material agreement state status. Is that right? Is that where you're
Yes.
moving to?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
All right.
All right.
Director, move to it then.
So as you said, next on the agenda is the source material agreement state feasibility study. I'd like to do a few introductions first. With me up here is Kyle Wentland, the Administrator of the Land Quality Division, and Brandy O'Brien, the Program Manager for the Uranium Recovery Program that already exists. Also, I don't know if they've joined us or not remotely, but we have the contractors associated with the feasibility study, Chris Pugsley with Thompson and Pugsley, and Stephen Cohen with Thompson and Pugsley as well. So they're available as you may have questions that we might not be able to answer. So last session, this committee requested that the DEQ conduct a feasibility study and provided funding. And the purpose of the feasibility study was to expand the agreement with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to include source material from rare earth element development. We entered into a contract with Thompson and Pugsley. They're a DC-based law firm, and they're experts in the Atomic Energy Act and with the NRC. Notably, Thompson and Pugsley worked with, or I should say for, Wyoming to set up the existing agreement state program and the uranium recovery program that we have. So the feasibility study was completed and submitted to this committee on September 26th this year. So you should have that. Key components of the feasibility study include an outline of the steps to become an agreement state for this very narrow area of source material, to provide industry and market-based background, and to provide an estimate of the funding and staffing that would be required for the program. In summary, it was to evaluate incorporating the source material generated from rare earth elements extraction into the NRC agreement with Wyoming. Now, Administrator Wentland will walk through the study, the staffing costs for stand-up and operations and other considerations. And then we'll turn it over to LSO to walk you through the bill.
We can move through this pretty quickly since you sent it out ahead of time, but go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Director Parfit. I'll go ahead and walk through here. I'm working off of slide 4 right now for you. And this just generally outlines the process, very similar to the original uranium program stand-up. The first step in that process, it's one of the key things and why you have a bill draft today, is that authorizes the governor to write a letter to the NRC to allow us to engage the NRC in moving forward with this type of program. Once we do that, step 2 comes into play, and we really work through developing the rules and regs and everything that is compliant and consistent with the NRC requirements for that source material program. Also some guidance and some other things, and including the development of the fee structure, which would be similar to the existing program. This would be ultimately would be looked at as a fee-based program. Upon approval, the last step in that is if we do have a licensee out there, those licensees would transfer to the state and we would take control of those if there were any in existence at that time. So that's really kind of that outline of that general process. One of the key things we look at in this is potential opposition from the NRC to this type of a program. We did a very similar thing with the stand-up of the uranium program. We took a very limited slice of the category for 11E2 material. This, we're looking at doing a similar deal where we're going to take a very limited slice of the category of source material. The NRC, we've engaged them initially. They're non-committal at this point, just like they were with the uranium program. But we do have some precedent there where we've done this with a similar category of the NRC regulatory categories. That's the thing you have to understand is source material is a category. 11E2 byproduct, there's a category for that. NRC typically wants you to take the entire category. We're looking at carving out a limited slice of that.
Would, if they wanted us to take the entire category, would we be amenable to that?
Mr. Chairman, that's a decision we would have to make because in the last bullet point, it outlines the NRC really has three potential outcomes here. They can choose to approve what we're proposing, they can amend it, or they could deny it. So we're not going to know that answer completely until we're engaged in that process. And that was very similar to the original stand-up of the uranium program.
Yep. Question?
Question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Wetland, so if they choose to modify it to include everything in the category, what is included in that category? This is more curiosity that if they said you take it all or nothing, I'm just curious as to what we would be taking.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to have Ms. O'Brien address that. She's the most familiar with those categories.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, so source material is material that contains uranium or thorium in a certain concentration. And so this could be this could include other mining materials produced from mining or milling. This could include I could see it also including some sort of processing for wastes, that sort of thing. And so I think where the department would be agreeable is if it's a byproduct of mining or milling, but where we would be hesitant to get into is anything that is not related to that, since we are housed within Land Quality Division, which regulates the mining and milling. And so there could be materials outside of that from wastewater plants. They can produce uranium on their resins and that sort of thing.
Thank you.
Yes, Representative Western.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you wouldn't mind, just in my ignorance, what else exactly? I mean, how broad is that code? Again, you said the thorium and the uranium and those millings, but I mean, is the NRC category pretty broad and a whole scope of different minerals, or what's? You can maybe give us a brief outline.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Western, we have our consultant on, and I'm going to have our consultant, Mr. Cohen, address that in a little more clarity. Stephen, can you hear us or get on, please?
Yes, I'm on. Mr. Chairman, the total breadth of source material is, as Ms. O'Brien stated, it's uranium and or thorium in any combination. And typically the NRC, well, not typically, the NRC exempts concentrations of uranium and or thorium below 500 milligrams per kilogram. When you're talking about the types of materials, as Ms. O'Brien stated, it could be side stream recovery from other mineral operations. It could be residuals from water treatment, wastewater treatment. It could also be calibration sources that laboratories use, or other construction companies may use when they're using radiation detection equipment. That's probably what you'd see as the breadth of the category for source material.
Mr. Cohen, do you want to state your name just for the record, just for the?
Oh, sure. My name is Stephen J. Cohen, Senior Regulatory Specialist with Environmental Restoration Group.
That answer your question? All right. All right, carry on.
Mr. Chairman, that takes us into slide 6, where we look at the estimated costs for the stand-up. When the feasibility study was developed, that was at the pre-feasibility level. We have refined those costs since that came out. And what you're looking at is about 50% of Ms. O'Brien's time where we're doing this stand-up. We're looking at adding 2 staff. We believe that based on our experience with the NRC and the staffing requirements for the uranium recovery program, that we believe that would be the minimum that NRC would require. And then we also have some assisted consulting fees in there. So you look at a $460,000 a year cost, and we're estimating 4 years for the stand-up. That's a very similar estimate to the original URP program. We did that one faster. Might happen here, but we don't want to bank on that. We do have new staffing at the NRC right now in these programs. So we're estimating that 4 years, and that gets us to the 1.84 million. Then you have an ongoing cost in slide 7, and that is once you stand the program up, you have to continue to operate that program, or you will have to wind up turning it back to the NRC, which is, if you go through the effort of this, that's probably not a desirable outcome. So then we're looking at the 2 FTE for the source material as ongoing, and then similar to the uranium program, we would have the fees fund one of the land quality division staff, currently funded FTE, and then obviously Ms. O'Brien would have some additional time in that in managing the additional staff. So that comes to that annual cost of the $555,000. So if you look at standing the program up, potentially operating it for a minimum of 10 years for an opportunity here, you're looking at the $6 million plus the 1.8, you round up and just say $10 million outlay.
I have a question. What happened to the program manager? He's on the stand-up at 81,000, then he drops down to 17. Does he go part-time or we just give him a cut?
Mr. Chairman, the initial stand-up is a pretty intensive time. You're developing rules, you're developing guidance, there's a lot of involvement there. Once you have all those things in place, that time requirement goes down. That's why it shifts from the 50% to the 10%. So in summary here, some of the similar things we have between the programs, the current NRC agreement state we have for that category, it involves material for uranium and thorium recovering from milling and the associated byproduct material. That's the 11E2 category that we talked about earlier. The current NRC agreement is 100% funded through fees. We currently have 17 licensees in that program paying those fees. And current URP staffing costs right now that the program's up and running and established, is annually about $1.2 million. The proposed agreement that we're talking about would again take a discrete segment. It's important to understand we're doing that carve-out proposal again for possession and use of source material. Right now, there's one Wyoming possession and use source material license application with the NRC that's out there. And at present, there are no rare earth approved source material license holders in Wyoming. So funding requirements for the stand-up would need to be appropriated, obviously, through the general fund.
Question.
Yes.
Do you know, are there any of those source material possession license for rare earths anywhere in the country yet? Do you know if there are or not?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not aware, but I am going to go ahead and ask our consultant, Mr. Cohen, if he could potentially address that.
Mr. Chairman, there is a source materials license and it's a state source materials license in California. It's for the MP Materials Mountain Pass project.
Thank you.
Oh,
I'll go first, I guess.
all right. Bo, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, my question is, how long does the process take currently with the NRC to get a license to possess rare earths and source material?
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to again defer to our consultant on that because we don't have direct experience with that. And maybe on the national level, Mr. Cohen might have a better answer for that.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Mr. Cohen.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It depends on the complexity of the operation. It could take, I would say, a minimum of 1.5 years, but it could also take multiple years. It all depends on the complexity of the operation.
Mr. Chairman, I might address Senator Beitman's question a little further. What we've seen from the current uranium program stand-up is our operators are telling us it's saving them about a third in cost in a considerable amount of time.
That do it? You had a question, Representative Western?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Cohen, you said that there's currently one pending application before the NRC for source material. Can you elaborate on that applicant?
Mr. Chairman, the applicant is Rare Element Resources. It's for the Bear Lodge deposit. Their application is being reviewed by the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
No other questions? Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, in buttoning up here, just kind of the last bullet item, if we did not have a licensee, it's important to understand that it would be required to have general funds fund that ongoing cost, and I have been asked what my thoughts on how long would we fund that type of program until we said, we would give it back if we didn't have a licensee. And based on my estimates, talking with our consultants, I think you're looking at least a 10-year period to have an opportunity for those type of business elements to develop if we had that licensing option. I'm sure there's some plus or minus on that, but that would be my best ballpark estimate on that. So with that, if there's further questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
You're thinking that if we've got licensees, we won't have any general fund spending on this project? But wouldn't it take quite a few licensees?
Mr. Chairman, that would be, the way it's structured is if you had one licensee, they would bear the full burden of that cost right now. If we had two, it would be 50-50. If you had four, it would be 25-25, so.
Huh. Wow. Other questions? Other questions? Other questions? Oh, Senator Bateman.
It's a hard-hitting question, but on page 10 of your slide, I'd like to know if that 7-point bull is on public land, and if so, what area?
Mr. Chairman, I'm really glad that Mr. Beitman asked that question. That bull is actually, it's a good comment. It's on coal mine reclamation that I completed years ago. It's actually located at the Antelope Mine. It's a photo that I took along with a couple others you've seen along the way. But that's a good example of what Wyoming reclamation can do right there.
Amen. Thank you.
And no, you can't get a permit for that area.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
May I make a comment to the senator on that?
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's the elk area that's kind of in the middle of nothing between Gillette and Douglas. Yeah, there are some enormous bulls in that area. I used to work up there, and yeah.
Rochelle Hills.
Yes,
Rochelle
exactly.
Hills is what it's
Hills.
called. But I don't know if it takes in antelope.
Mr. Chairman, it goes back to if you build the habitat, they'll be there.
Yeah. Any other pertinent questions? Hearing none, thank you. Thank you for your testimony.
Mr. Chairman.
Anything else?
Mr. Chairman, I believe that LSO Representative Mr. Fuller does have a bill draft for you, and he may want to walk you through that.
And you're not going to?
Mr. Chairman, I didn't draft that bill.
All right, we'll let LSO take us through this bill that we have before us. 23 LSO 282?
Yes, Mr.
Okay.
Chairman. Working draft 0.6, this is 11-04 in the online meeting materials. This draft is one the committee requested in June, depending on the results of the feasibility study the committee just heard from. And this bill would authorize the governor to begin negotiations with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to amend or provide for an additional source material agreement. And the bill would also appropriate funds and authorize positions associated with implementing the amended agreement. The changes on pages 2 and 3 are simply conforming amendments to 3511-2001B, C, and E to reference the source material that would be contemplated through this additional or amended agreement. Page 4, line 6, this is the key language of the bill that would authorize the governor to contact the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to express the state's intent to amend our existing agreement with the NRC or enter into an additional agreement that would provide for the assumption of regulatory authority over source material involved in incidental uranium or thorium recovery associated with rare earth mining or processing operations. This would provide, similar to 3511-2001A, under our existing agreement, that the NRC would maintain regulatory authority over all other source material that's not specified in this section. The changes on pages 5, 6, and 7 are conforming amendments as well to Article 20 in Title 35, Chapter 11. Then on page 8, line 9, this is section 2 of the bill, and would require the Department of Environmental Quality to adopt a fee schedule associated with licenses for the source material that's referenced in the bill. And then page 8, line 18, would require the promulgation of rules associated with licenses for this source material. Page 9, line 2, authorizes 2 full-time positions to the Department of Environmental Quality for implementing this act. Page 9, line 9, section 4 of the bill appropriates from the general fund $1,840,000 to the Department of Environmental Quality for implementing this act and funding those positions. That appropriation would not revert until 2027, until June 30, 2027. And then the bill would be effective immediately. With that, Mr. Chairman, I would stand for questions.
Yes, Senator Rothfuss.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. One question I have is, it gets back to the amount of work and scrutiny that went into the original bill draft and the ridiculous level of concern about commas and pronouns and anything else that was associated in the original bill draft by the NRC, so that we had to iterate to get it right to the point where they were even comfortable moving forward. And we amend that prior statute. But I don't know if we're amending it in any place that they cared about. So that's my question is, are we amending into any of the space of statute that the NRC scrutinized ridiculously the first time, such that maybe we would cause them heartburn by not getting the words exactly like they want them?
Mr. Chairman, I'll take that one. Mr. Chairman, I'll try and take that one. Senator Rothfuss, I do not believe that we're infringing on the existing program. What I would say is, with some of this language, and especially just the conforming language, you know, if we run this by NRC, there might be a word tweak or two that we come to you in January with, right? Because then we'll have had a chance to engage them. But I don't see that infringing on the existing program.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the amendments that we're adding, do you recall, though, whether that was an area that was scrutinized? Because a lot of that is our authorization to enter into it as opposed to the terms of what we've entered into. I don't think we're changing the terms of any of the things that we entered into. Is that an accurate representation of what we see?
Mr. Chairman, that's accurate.
Okay, good, thank you.
Any other questions? Oh, yes, Senator Brightman.
Thank you. On page 4, where we're talking about, you know, the purpose of this is to cover incidental uranium and thorium recovery. Is the carve out at the bottom of page 4, does that refer to uses such as like nuclear power and enrichment and de-enrichment? That's probably not considered in this bill? Is that what that carve-out is referring to? I don't have the time to pull up 42 USC, section 274, blah, blah, blah. So is that where it's going?
Mr. Chairman, in addressing that, the NRC has absolute authority over any nuclear reactor or fuels, and that is part of that carve-out or of the original statute, but we would not have any reach into any of that. They don't share that.
Yes. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One other area I was curious about with the handling of thorium, we talked about before the possibility of maybe the thorium ends up having market value and becomes a commodity instead of a waste product. Are we anticipating this being structured in such a way that we could then appropriately manage that? Or would we only be getting licensed such that we have to treat it as a waste material? And then somehow somebody else would have to work through the NRC if they wanted to sell it as a source material or for other beneficial use. Any concept of how this would go, or is that something that we just need to explore?
Mr. Chairman, that's a good question, and I'm going to see if our consultant that's online might be able to address that a little further. Mr. Cohen?
Mr. Chairman, uranium, if it's concentrated to a sufficient amount, that could be sent off to an existing uranium mill for recycling. That would have more market value. Right now, thorium it has been decreasing in market value. There is the potential future for thorium reactors, but at this point, thorium would probably end up getting sent off to low-level waste disposal.
Yeah.
I want the eventually, though. I mean, I want to know that when we're engaging in a multi-year process that we're anticipating other possibilities, and we've had discussions about thorium nuclear reactors. So what would the circumstance be if it became a valuable product for any market? Would we anticipate this regulation or this approach through the NRC giving us the authority to then be selling that, or would we have to have additional authority to do that?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, so actually our existing program that we have, the uranium recovery program, we have the authority for uranium or thorium recovery. So we currently do have that authority if someone intended to mine for the purposes of extracting thorium. We do currently have that authority.
Mr. Chairman, but that's where the nuance is, where if that's your intent, based on the language, then you can use the thorium and you can sell the thorium. If it is a waste product, it is under a different category. And what I'm hoping is that the waste product from one process where now we're talking rare earths is generating thorium as a waste product. It's not the intent of the mining operation. I don't want to have to throw that away. If we don't want to throw that away, I'm hoping that we would have the authority in the end, sufficient licensing authority, that we could make that a value-added product if there were a market at that time. And I recognize the good gentleman's point that there isn't right now, but I don't want to go to all of this trouble and then still have to throw it away if there's a market.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes. Representative Burke.
A question for Mr. Cohen, I think can resolve this. Mr. Cohen, with this agreement state status, if this passes and the state has the authorization and they issue a possession license to a rare earth production facility, and they have a buyer for the thorium, does this license give them the ability to sell that to the buyer, to possess it and then sell it to the buyer?
Yes, it does.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
I think what we're talking about here is extracting that from the waste of the mining. And if they're going to do that, they probably are going to have a market, because that's going to be expensive. It's really not concentrated at all. So there's going to be an expense to extracting it from the waste of the rare earth process. So I think there's gonna be a lot of expense going, if you do this, there must be a market somehow of more than $30 or $40 for uranium. So anyway, it gives us the ability to monitor that and work that if we can find somebody that's interested.
Mr. Chairman, I think if you have industry here, that might be a good question for them today.
Other questions? Other questions? Oh, yes, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is the one application that's in, is that public? Who holds that? What the status of it is?
Mr. Chairman, I believe Mr. Cohen disclosed that, and that is the Rare Earth Element Resources operation up in the Bear Lodge in the northeastern corner of the state.
But it's just an application, right? They don't have authority yet.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that's correct. And I believe the application in hand right now is probably for their demonstration plant in Upton.
Yeah. And they've been working on that for years, for 5 or 6 years now. And hopefully we can get something going with that. Other questions? Other questions? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Director and Kyle and Ms. O'Brien. Do we have any public comment on source material? He's interested in this one.
Yeah. This isn't garbage, Mr.
No, this is not garbage. He sees some value here.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Minerals Committee, I'm Travis Deta. I'm the Executive Director of the Wyoming Mining Association. And I'm joined today by Mr. Randy Scott, who is the President and CEO of Rare Element Resources and may be able to answer some of those questions that were asked of the previous panelists. I want to hit on 3 points here. Number one, the mining industry and our rare earth folks are very supportive of this. The agreement state program for our uranium producers has been a success, a big success. Administrator Wentland noted they're saving about a third of the costs of what they were paying under the former regulatory regimen with the NRC. And perhaps more importantly, it's time. They are saving time. The relationship between the industry and the Land Quality Division and the Uranium Recovery Program is excellent. It's just been really good for the industry and for the state of Wyoming, especially in tough times right now. So we would like to see this, expanded a little bit so that we can, get a rare earths industry off the ground, not only in Wyoming, but in the United States, because we're not even really on the playing field right now. So this is, we're starting from scratch. The state of Wyoming is doing a lot of work already. I had a good conversation with the state geologist last week. And, the Wyoming State Geological Survey and the University of Wyoming School of Energy Resources have received millions of dollars in federal funding to locate critical mineral resources in Wyoming. In the next 2 years, almost $4 million in airborne geophysics surveys will be flown over central and southern Wyoming to identify mineralization trends. And these types of surveys are crucial to attract that interest of private industry. We're doing what we need to do to make it attractive for companies to come here and develop the resource. One of the questions that I asked of Dr. Campbell at the geology, do we have enough in the ground? Do we have enough resources to support multiple companies and to support and the answer is yes. So we're laying the groundwork here to attract these companies, and it's important to note we're in competition with other states to build this industry, and we're ahead of many, but we're kind of behind on some, those specific states being Nevada and Idaho. Dr. Campbell told me the train is leaving the station and we need to be on it. And this is one component of being on it and making it attractive for these companies to come here and develop the resource. Obviously, when you have companies on the ground, you have jobs, you're generating revenue. And, we've got a lot of stuff in the ground and we need to expand our mining operations. And this is the opportunity to to bring in that new sector. You know, the state legislature also, you appropriated $130,000 to critical mineral research. 50,000 of this went towards these geological surveys that I spoke about a few minutes ago. We've shown a commitment to develop this resource and to develop this industry. And, you know, and finally, you know, this body and this committee passed the assigned trust program for bonding. So we have a very attractive option for companies to come in and take advantage of that. We're laying the groundwork right now, and by passage of this and bringing you know, rare earths under our agreement state program is a good thing, and there's a lot of opportunity there. And Mr. Chairman, I would turn it over to Mr. Scott and let you hear from industry directly, unless you have any questions of me.
Any questions for Mr. Detai? No questions. Good job.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My name is Randy Scott, and I'm the president and CEO of Rare Element Resources. Rare Element Resources is a company that's developing the Bear Lodge project up in Sundance and Upton. We have been the recent recipient of a $22 million grant from the Department of Energy to build a $44 million demonstration plant, which we're in the process of doing right now at Upton, and moving along quite nicely on that project as well. First of all, I would like to say thank you very much for the opportunity to come before you and to express our support for this particular bill. We think this is an extremely important aspect of building out not just our project, but the capability within the state of Wyoming itself. As Travis mentioned, we're already starting to see in the state of Wyoming some activity with regards to exploring for, finding, and potentially developing new rare earth resources, not just our outstanding resource at Bear Lodge. And I think that momentum is extremely valuable. And as Travis also said, Wyoming's not the only game in town anymore. If you pay close attention to what's happening both nationally and globally, people are racing towards the finish line of some sort right now. Long way away from that, but there is a tremendous amount of activity being supported primarily by the expectation of very high demand for electric vehicles and for wind turbines and other potential uses of these rare earth elements.
Mr. Scott, would you move that microphone over in the middle of your sweep? You're kind of a sweeper. You sweep left to right, and
Does that work?
sometimes it picks it up, sometimes it doesn't.
I'm sorry. It's the first time I've ever been told I speak too softly.
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, following on that, we've been promoting, I guess is the right word, this change to the agreement state status when we first heard about it many years ago. We're, as I said before, we're very excited about the prospect of this becoming the standard policy here in the state of Wyoming for rare element resources. Anticipating a couple of questions that I had before, heard before, was that yes, I believe we are the only applicant of an NRC license at this particular point in time. And it's taken us a long time to get to that, but the application is for the demonstration plant. We have to have an NRC license to process the material for the demonstration plant itself. And that small plant is quite a concerted effort, as you might imagine, to go through the regulatory issues working with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. The larger commercial plant will fall on the heels of a successful demonstration plant. It is our intent to move forward with that commercial plant once we have succeeded and know everything that we need to know from the demonstration plant. So the timing of moving forward with the agreement state work that needs to be done to put it in place, to stand it up, seems to mesh fairly well with our need to put in place a new license for the commercial plant. And based on our experience, we look forward to having the state of Wyoming administer that license for us, to help us to go through, get it approved, and then to administer it going forward as well. So the money that the state of Wyoming is being asking the committee here to approve to stand up the agreement state amendment, we think is extremely worthwhile. There is the question out there with regards to how do you fund the ongoing costs associated with the program once it's stood up. After considerable discussion within the ranks of Rare Element Resources, we believe that once Rare Element Resources is an applicant under the new stood up agreement, that we would pay our pro rata share of that, of those operating costs going forward. Of course, there's much to be yet determined with regards to that, and it is our understanding that that process takes the form of a memorandum of understanding between the state or WDQ or whoever it is and the individual applicants. And we would look forward to moving into that discussion as soon as it's appropriate to do it. So in summary, thank you again for the opportunity. It's extremely important to Rare Element Resources and all the other rare earth projects that may be located in Wyoming. It's extremely important in Wyoming, and it's actually very important to the United States of America that we begin to mention. Travis hit it right on the head when he said that the current uranium participants, one of the major advantages that they've seen is the ability to move through in a timely fashion. I'm sure you all know that when you begin a process with the NRC, you have no idea how long it's going to take, and you are not given any assurances as to how long it will take. All you know is that as that activity goes forward, you're being charged $288 an hour for people to review, participate in, sit in meetings and everything else with the NRC. And we're pleased that the demonstration plan process with NRC is moving forward at a reasonably good clip, but it's still not as efficient as it could have been done here in the state of Wyoming, we believe. So we look forward to it. Mr. Chairman?
Question for Mr. Scott. Representative Hyder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Scott, appreciate you being here to testimony for this committee meeting. I appreciate your commitment to the state of Wyoming and your operations in this northeast portion of the state. Look forward to a long and lasting relationship. You mentioned the ongoing costs of the licensee under this program, which could be significant, especially as you mentioned the pro rata share. If you're the only licensee, that could be quite large. As we heard from earlier testimony, it's expected that that if it was just one, it would be divisible by one. If it was two, it would be divisible by two. Are you acceptable to that testimony that you may be the only one at first to pay this ongoing cost?
We obviously hope that that's not the case, and that pro rata share is being divided up among other potential applicants, and much like the uranium process has been. And as I said before, I frankly anticipate that over the next 4 years to stand up, 3 years to stand up, plus the license activity, that there are going to be other licensees seeking the same sort of license in the state of Wyoming. If there is not, then subject to a positive outcome from the demonstration plant and subject to our decision to move forward with the commercial plant, we would accept the pro rata share moving forward, but we look forward to sharing that pro rata share if we can.
Senator Bateman.
Come on, there we go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for everything. This is exciting stuff. I think this will be a huge success for Wyoming, and looking forward to that. My question is, farther down the road, Wyoming, we've learned, is very good at producing our raw materials and shipping them out of state for developing into products. This early in the stage, has any of the taxpayer-funded economic development organizations reached out to you guys, to any of your organizations, to work with you on what it would take to keep the jobs and the manufacturing that these rare earths potentially could bring somebody? Hopefully it's Wyoming. Have you guys thought about how to vertically integrate in Wyoming and keep those jobs here and grow the economy in Wyoming with not just pulling it out of the ground, but making products with it? Thank you.
The answer is yes, we have. And I think it's fair to say, though, that right now, almost all of our focus is on the success of the demonstration plant. You may recall from previous testimony that I had that this is innovative technology, proprietary technology that's being tried at scale for the first time. And it's taken years to develop this technology. And so I think it's fair to say that if we are successful with that, okay, that the board and other members would be looking forward to how to create additional value added from the success of that, not just through the construction of a commercial scale operation, but potentially moving downstream into other value-added products.
Representative Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I might just make a brief comment on that. Okay. And this is public information, so I don't think I'm divulging a confidence, but Rare Element Resources' major investor is General Atomics. And a representative from General Atomics, when I asked them the specific question in a public meeting of what their intention was to vertically integrate all the rare earth production in Wyoming from the mine, all the way through magnets. So that's why I support this, and I'll just come out and say that now, is that potential. And if you look at the report that was done by Thompson and Pugsley and the consulting engineers, when you look at the value and the price of some of these materials, neodymium is $17 million a metric ton right now. There is real value here that I think Wyoming can make good use of. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know that's a little out of order.
Not unusual.
I know.
Any other questions for the speakers? Any other questions? I have a couple questions. I'm hearing that you're saying your small demo plant is going to cost about 44 million, 22 million from one source and 22 million. So what will the large online plant actually cost? Is that tenfold or?
Yeah, good question. As you go through, and I'm sure most of you already know this, but as you go through the process of determining the economics of the individual unit processes, which is, for us, is the extraction and separation, particularly of the individual rare earth elements. Once that economics is known with some confidence, then you put all of that information back into an extensive economic model of the project itself, which includes a detailed mine plan. And the Bear Lodge project is quite interesting because not only is it extensive, but it also has high-grade zones or dikes that come nearly to the surface. And those zones allow us to preferentially mine in particular areas to recover high-grade material. The point is that there's a lot of latitude in what kind of mine plan you develop moving forward. I think that the market, though, will really be the determining factor as to the scale of the project. In the past, we have always said that we didn't want, although we could have, build something so large that it drew the attention of one country in the world who would try to manipulate you and slow you down and everything else. But I'm not sure that's the case anymore, because we've seen a lot of companies moving into this space. So the scale, to answer your question, Senator, probably in the range of $200 to $400 million would be the kind of project that we would be looking at.
Mr. Scott, you probably heard us discussing previous about the uranium and thorium from the rare earths. I'm thinking that takes a separate processing plant, but maybe your demo plant or your large plant could extract that as you're extracting the rare earths, and you wouldn't have any additional costs?
Yes, another good question. The separation plant is the separation side of the separation plant, of the demonstration plant, is based on traditional solvent extraction. Although there's lots of innovations applied to that, as will eventually become obvious to people who get a chance to tour the plant when it's in operation. But as part of that separation activity, you separate the individual elements in groups or individually as you move through the solvent extraction process. Thorium is one of those rare earth, one of those elements that will be separated pretty much fully, okay? And then packaged up, in the case of the demonstration plant, packaged up and sent to a licensed disposal facility. So there will be no radioactive materials wandering around the demonstration plant post our success with it. So the thorium is a relatively pure product, okay? But we don't want to over refine it, because we're essentially disposing of it. And outside of the potential for thorium reactors, I'm not aware of any significant alternative use of thorium at this point. So although there are lots of people looking at different ways to be successful doing that, and there's a tremendous amount of thorium that'll be available, in our plans going forward, we've always assumed that we have to dispose of it, and that we do not get any additional revenue being generated by it from our operations.
So the disposal plant would be rid of it? It couldn't be recovered and sold to a thorium?
No, there would be an intermediate step where that thorium is packaged up at the plant and then sent to a disposal site. At that point, you would look to whether or not if there was a commercial use, you would look to whether or not you could further refine that material, make it into a product that the buyer would want to see. And that would all be essentially added on to the eventual process going forward.
And the uranium you would extract would be like our U-238 we get out of the ground?
Yeah.
It needs a lot of refining?
Yeah. Interestingly enough, there is very little uranium in the Bear Lodge ore. Very little uranium. So it'll probably come out as part of the solvent extraction activities as well, but there's nothing to speak of.
Yes, Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Scott, just out of curiosity for myself, a lot of hazardous waste, you may dispose of it, but you retain ownership or liability for that waste. Is that the case with thorium, that you may dispose of it, but you'll still carry that liability or per se ownership that you may recapture in the future if it becomes valuable?
I'm no expert on that, but I believe once we have disposed of it in a licensed facility, the ability to retain ownership of it sort of disappears. No questions, Representative Sherwood? Okay, no more questions?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, one final comment.
Certainly.
With Chairman Greer going off of the committee and taking his leave, I just want to say thank you to you and Chairman Greer for your leadership over the last 2 years. This committee got a lot of great work done. And it's good for our industry, good for Wyoming. And to each and every one of you, I just want to say thank you.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Taken. Thank you very much. Okay, anybody else to speak on the thorium and uranium extraction? Any other public comments? Anybody on Zoom? No? Okay. Thank you. Thank you. We'll close public comment and move to the bill then. Committee, what's your pleasure?
Move the bill.
Moved by Burkhart and seconded by Cooper. Moved and seconded. Any comment? Any, yes.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a few comments on the bill. Interesting thing with this, when you look at the value here, I was speaking with a company located in Utah who does uranium milling and mining. They're taking ore from the state of Georgia to Utah, processing out the uranium and thorium, which that's their business. Then they're shipping the raw or the rare earth materials, that concentrate, to Estonia for processing. And my question was, you can't tell me that's economical. And they said, yes, they're making money doing it. So there's the value there, that they can ship this all over the world and we can concentrate the rare earth material here in Wyoming. I think some of you know, I serve on the International Standards Organization Committee 298, which covers rare earth materials. And I can tell you right now, the Chinese delegation does everything they can to keep the United States from being able to process and effectively process rare earth materials. So the other thing is, and some people have asked me the question, we already have in statute how to address this from a severance tax basis. So there is severance tax on this, that we will get those dollars from a rare earth mine. And there are other companies looking at Wyoming heavily, because while the Bear Lodge project and that deposit is a very, very good project, probably world-class, and that there are other deposits in Wyoming that may also be economically recoverable. So I think we're setting ourselves up for the future, and that's why I would support the bill. And one thing for Mr. Scott, a question, which is, I'm surprised to see you here. I thought you retired. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay.
Other comments? Other comments? Any changes to page 1? Any changes to page 2? Any changes to page 3? Any changes to page 4? That's our big page. Any changes to page 5? Page 6? Page 7? Page 8? Page 9? And page 10? Question's been called for. Sensing you're ready to vote, we'll do a roll call to approve this bill. Please.
This is a roll call vote for 23 LSO 282, source materials associated with rare earth mining agreement. Senator Beitman? Aye. Senator Cooper?
Aye.
Senator Rothfuss? Senator Wasserberger?
Aye.
Representative Bear?
Aye.
Representative Burkhart?
Aye.
Representative Duncan?
Aye.
Representative Ayer? Aye. Representative Gray? Aye. Representative Heiner? Aye. Representative Sherwood? Aye. Representative Western. Co-Chairman Greer excused. Chairman Anderson.
Aye.
13 aye.
Squeaked by again. We put off a subject yesterday, the YDOT aeronautics report, and we're going to put it right here after the DEQ. So can we, I think all those guys are online, aren't they? Can we get them brought up and go over the aeronautics report?
On a bill yesterday, this one that failed, can a guy make a motion to reconsider today, or is yesterday the end of it?
Yesterday, had yesterday. Which one was it? Oh, yeah. Yeah, it did fail, didn't it? 7-6.
Chris can sponsor it by himself.
I think they're all on the Zoom. So are they ready yet?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Are they? Okay.
We have Mariah Johnson from YDOT.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. My name is Mariah Johnson. I'm the Air Service Development Program Manager with YDOT. And I'll be running you through the Wyoming Air Service update today. If it's all right with you, we'll get started.
Yes, please proceed.
Perfect. So I just kind of want to walk you through today the statewide figures from calendar year 2021, our continued COVID-19 recovery efforts, and then talk through the Air Service Enhancement Program update, as well as a capacity purchase agreement update. So to start with, we'll go ahead and look through some of the numbers from calendar year 2021. And as you can see from this slide, for the first 15 years leading up to the pandemic, Wyoming was on an upward trend with passenger levels. 2019, we saw record passenger numbers, and then 2020 and the pandemic hit, and our numbers were cut nearly in half. However, 2021, we saw great recovery, and our passenger levels actually surpassed 2019 for our best year yet. On our next slide, you can see that Wyoming recovered the most passengers 2021 over 2019 and was the only state in the country that had positive recovery of passengers. On our next slide, we can see all of our airports broken out in terms of passenger recovery and levels. And obviously Jackson does stand out, but one thing to note is that all of the airports in the state have made a strong recovery since COVID. When we look at the percentage share of each of the airports in the state, Jackson really does lead the state in terms of its share of passengers because of its robust market. However, Riverton, Sheridan, and Cody all saw increases in their share of passengers. On our next slide, we take a look at our first 6 months of 2020 just to kind of see where we're at right now. Riverton and Sheridan have seen some huge increases in passengers since 2019, even with some of the flight reductions we've been seeing. And this is mainly due to a change in carriers and the move to the CPA. Casper, unfortunately, has seen route reductions since 2019, which is driving their decrease. And then Gillette and Rock Springs are also down to 1 flight a day, so that's driving their decrease as well. And another thing to note is that the Jackson runway was closed this spring, so that's why we're seeing such a significant decrease in passengers for Jackson. On the next slide, we'll kind of look at some of the trends that we're seeing for 2020. As I just mentioned, the Jackson runway being closed during the spring is going to have a huge impact on the passenger levels for the year. So that's something just to keep in mind when we're looking at the passenger levels for 2022. We're starting to see some pretty big constraints on resources, especially at a regional level, which is limiting the capacity for recovery. I think everybody's heard about the pilot shortage, but what we're seeing is it's not just pilot shortages. We're seeing everything from baggage handlers to flight attendants. We've got very limited resources there, and it's limiting the capacity for recovery. We really started to see this last winter, but it's become very prominent this spring and into this summer, especially because we are starting to see a recovery of business traffic as well as increasing fares. And even with those increasing fares, passenger demand is still high. So we've got resource constraints as well as a high demand for travel, which are just a couple of the challenges that we are seeing through 2022. On the next slide, we'll look at some national trends as well as some things that are going on within the state. Nationally, our leisure traffic levels are ahead of 2019 levels, but business is still a bit lower. We are seeing a significant increase in fuel costs and labor costs, particularly for pilots, which is kind of driving some of our other challenges. And then at a state level, we are seeing that for the 12 months ending the first quarter of 2022, Wyoming saw resident traffic rebound to 128% of 2019 levels, and our visiting or non-resident traffic was at 133% of 2019 levels. So we are seeing some really good rebounds and recovery from the state of Wyoming. On the next slide, in looking at the COVID-19 recovery, I've touched on this a little bit, but the regional airlines are seeing a pilot shortage that is severely limiting recovery in small jet dependent markets. Major airlines are hiring pilots away from the regionals faster than the regionals can replace them. And then we're also seeing rising fuel costs, which is compounding the unit costs for the smaller jet. Economics are forcing the continued migration away from 50-seat jets to higher density aircrafts. And we have seen 67 airports across the nation lose all service by a major airline since 2019, which is actually up from 58 since the 1st of September of this year. So we really do have some challenges that we're facing in the airline industry as a whole, but also for those of us in the markets that the regional airlines really support. In terms of the capacity purchase agreement, throughout the pandemic, this has truly been a backstop for retaining commercial air service to the state of Wyoming in such a volatile travel environment. It hasn't just been about the cost savings, but it's really been about securing resources for the state of Wyoming. So then moving into the projects from this past year, looking at the Air Service Enhancement Program, these are the projects that we funded, and I'd like to touch on a few of them. First of all, with Cheyenne, they're going through an approximately $40 to $50 million runway expansion right now, and we're looking at one more summer of construction before it's completed. Unfortunately, the runway was closed a large portion of 2021, so there was no service during that time. And then the runway was shortened this spring, which led to weight restrictions. So it limited the number of seats that the airlines could even sell to start with. So that's kind of what's been going on with Cheyenne. And in terms of Cody, their project was flight to Chicago one time per week. Unfortunately, the load factors were only at about 50%, and we would have anticipated them to be higher. Ultimately, it did bring people to the state and brought in some tourism, but we really just feel like the timing probably was not correct for this flight to do well. And then the last one that I want to touch on is Casper. This is really an example of how the the ASEP program, the Air Service Enhancement Program, is designed to work. Casper got a call last year from SkyWest, letting them know that they were going to have to cancel the route to Salt Lake if we didn't have a minimum revenue guarantee in place. And so Casper was able to apply for this project to show the airlines that they had the funding there and available. And they, they flew the route and the service turned out great. And Casper ended up using a very, very small portion of what the anticipated need was. And so, having this program available to them really made sure that they kept a route in place. So on the next slide, we'll look at something similar, but for the capacity purchase agreement. As you can see here, the capacity purchase agreement, it has really done some great things for all 4 of our markets. The next slide, I'll talk through some of the highlights of the capacity purchase agreement. First and foremost, it helped us retain service over COVID-19, while many similar sized airports and markets saw reduction or even lost service. Gillette, Riverton, and Sheridan each returned allocated money to the state. And all 4 of our CPA markets averaged over 60% passenger growth over fiscal year 2021. Gillette and Sheridan both exceeded pre-pandemic passenger levels in fiscal year 22, and Sheridan more than doubled their pre-pandemic levels. So we saw really great things from the CPA over fiscal year 22. In terms of the CPA, we did go ahead and renegotiate the next term of the contract this spring. It secures the CPA market's nonstop service to United's Denver hub for another 3 years. Once the pilot constraints subside, the contract will provide at least 2 round trips per day for each of the markets. It does include some financial penalties if the reliability falls below acceptable levels. It also provides an opportunity to renegotiate rates at the end of each year if the conditions change substantially. It ensures true share or code share for connections to United's vast network. And while our block hour costs did increase, our rates are still substantially below other rates proposed by regional airlines in other markets. And we kind of break that out for you on the next slide. Like I said, our new contract is at higher rates, but we are still significantly lower than some of the other rates that we're seeing for comparable markets in the area. So then on the next slide, I wanted to mention that really the capacity purchase agreement is working as intended. We are seeing more passengers at a lower cost. We've seen a 75% reduction in cost per passenger in Riverton and Sheridan combined, with 165% more passengers. We do know that our cost per passenger is likely to increase moving forward as we see the industry costs are rising. As I mentioned before, fuel costs have gone up significantly, and we are seeing increases due to pilot wages and things of that nature. A couple last things. We were able to use the additional $2 million in CARES funding that was allocated to us in calendar year 2022. And we are utilizing the $8.8 million of ARPA funding that was allocated to us as well. And this will be used during calendar years 22, 23, and 24. With that, I'd like to discuss a few of the construction projects that we have going on. This is not my area of expertise, and unfortunately, Brian was not able to join us today. So I'm going to just give you kind of a high level what's going on with all of these. I mentioned a little bit that the Jackson runway was reconstructed Yes.
Mariah, before you move on to that.
Absolutely.
Can you tell us what happened with Sheridan and Sheridan and Riverton that were their deplanements increased, their passengers increased so much? Was there something they did, or is there something we could do to help them continue that?
So really with those two markets, what we're looking at is that in 2019, they were still with another airline. They were not in the capacity purchase agreement. And that was, there were things that airline did not have that the capacity purchase has provided them. A code share with a major airline being one of the biggest ones. So that is really the driver that we are seeing as to why they've seen such significant increases in passengers.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So the Jackson runway reconstruction that I've mentioned, we've got a few pictures of it right here. They were able to shut down their runway, and while that was a detriment, they were able to get that entire runway reconstructed in the time that they had anticipated, and it opened on time. So that's what Jackson was able to get done this spring. On the next slide, we've got the Sheridan Terminal rehabilitation and expansion. So you can kind of see what Sheridan is in the process of doing right now. And one thing that I will point out from an air service perspective is that, you know, we're really looking at these terminal rehabilitations, expansions, things of that nature as a way to prepare our airports for larger aircraft and an increase in passengers that we're starting to really see, and we hope to build upon over the next few years. So the next step, we also have Rock Springs in the Southwest Wyoming Regional Airport Terminal that's under construction right now. And then a few other significant projects are Casper. They've got terminal projects going on, securing the area for renovation and passenger loading bridge, entrance road and parking lot reconstruction, a new car rental facility. Cheyenne, as I kind of mentioned, they're undergoing a major main runway reconstruction. And then Cody is working on improved runway for 4 approach and expand and rehabilitate their commercial terminal. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would entertain any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the presentation. Going to the pilot shortage, I can't find heads or tails on the internet whether or not does SkyWest or United still require the COVID vaccine for pilots? And is that creating the shortage?
Mr. Chairman, that is not something that I know off the top of my head. I would need to do some looking into that, and then I can get an answer back to you.
Okay, any other questions for Mariah on her presentation? All right, thank you, Mariah.
Thank you.
And we're going to move to who? Mariah, who's the next speaker?
I'm the only one here from YDOT.
Oh, well, go ahead then.
I don't have anything additional, so.
We're done. All right, well, good report. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. No more
Mr.
questions
Chairman?
from, yes, Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to, if I could, real quick, make a quick comment to Senator Beitman's statement. I don't know if it's relevant or not, but I do know my son is an officer in the Navy, and he's a pilot, and they're extremely short. And it was well before COVID that they're extremely short in pilots and jet pilots in particular. So I think a lot of people retired, and that's part of the problem is you got a lot of older pilots that have retired, and I think that might be part of the problem. Don't know, just speculating.
Okay, thank you. I too know a pilot, an F-35 pilot, and he's got his COVID shots, but it's not required. for them. But I think what you're asking for is a commercial airline if they require it. So we'll get that answer. Mariah will get right back to us. Okay, thank you, Mariah. There's
Thanks so
no,
much.
I don't think there's any bills or anything on that. Is there? So that'll conclude the YDOT presentation. And we'll move right on to Representative Iyer. Is it a little early? A little too early? Okay, all right. Then we'll move to UW School of Energy Resources update, please. Holly? Good morning and welcome. The Traveler.
Yep. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I am trying to get all my driving miles in the last 2 days. So it's terrifying that you're running ahead of schedule, but I did make it. So, okay. So I have some slides. I have 30 minutes allotted, and I'm going to have to move relatively quickly to get through this material. But of course, interrupt me at any point if you have questions or clarification. So I'm Holly Krecka, Executive Director of the University of Wyoming School of Energy Resources. And we're sharing our slides. On slide 2 is our mission, which I always show, is energy-driven economic development for the state of Wyoming. And in that mission, we have 3 main parts: outreach, research, and academics. So quickly, I'll just give a little highlight of our academic program. So moving on to slide 4. Our academic program, really, we look at it as we have a major degree, energy resource management and development, training students to put together energy projects. And it is successful in terms of student outcomes, but our enrollment has been lower, and so we've reinvested in that program. We've also trying to grow the program. If you listen to energy discussions just across the nation, they're relatively shallow, and so we see part of our role is to help students graduating from the University of Wyoming understand a little more depth about energy topics. So we've been investing in our program. So moving to slide 5, we are starting to see enrollment increase. So since I've been here, we rolled out a minor focused on energy. We also have a 3+3 with law that is now being marketed to students. So that's in place as well, allows students that are legally and energy focused to get an undergrad degree and a law degree in 6 years, so saving a year. And we're currently investigating a land management certificate and a CCUS certificate that could be helpful both for traditional students, but also non-traditional students, to look at technologies like CCUS, where Wyoming's really a leader, and be able to retool their skill set through a certificate. So we are seeing our program grow, and we're going to continue to work on that. Although I would say this has been very low cost growth. There's a lot of great energy courses on campus already that we're packaging together and making, really just raising awareness in some cases. So moving on to our research program. So moving to slide 7. Just a quick reminder of the structure of how we structure our research program into centers of excellence. Those listed in yellow are led by staff at the School of Energy Resources. They work on this full time. They don't generally teach classes. They might once in a while, but they're not tenure track faculty. And then those on the right-hand side in brown are led by tenure track faculty. And I'm going to just talk about some of these centers, about updates in the research going on in these, but I would say this is really the heart of the School of Energy Resources, and this is what helps us execute on our mission. And, you know, we have both great staff and faculty at the University of Wyoming focused on Wyoming-specific energy issues, and the way we do it is through these centers of excellence.
Mr. Chairman.
Question here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Crook, you've made some personnel changes. Would you just briefly talk about those?
Sure.
Your structure?
Sure. So we now have a senior director of research. This program is quite large. I would say our overall research effort per year is in the $18-ish million per year. So we have a senior director of research overseeing all that. Of course, that funding comes from a number of different sources. And then we have Fred McLaughlin. Dr. McLaughlin's leading the Center for Economic Geology Research. He was formerly with the survey, has been working on Wyoming subsurface energy issues for a long time: oil and gas, carbon storage, rare earths and critical minerals, pretty much anything in the subsurface. The Center for Carbon Capture and Conversion is now led by Trina Pfeiffer, and Richard Horner is going to be retiring in the spring. So we're in the handoff phase of that now. And Trina is such a great hire especially considering where we are in that program. So I'll talk about it later, but we're moving that program creating novel non-energy products from coal. We're moving out of the lab and into the field. She has a lot of large-scale construction expertise and management, but also has been collaborating with the School of Energy Resources as a contract researcher for about 4 years. So she's very familiar with the program. She does understand the R&D side, which we always want to keep going, even as we're kind of handing the baton to industry as we scale up. So we are in the process of, we have selected a candidate for the Center for Energy Regulation and Policy Analysis. We have not made that announcement yet. 3D Visualization Center is now led by Kyle Summerfield, who's been with that center for many years. And the Hydrogen Energy Research Center is led by Eugene Holomyak. So we were fortunate enough to get him from the Kansas Geologic State Survey. He'd done tremendous amount of work around CCUS, and he has a big focus on hydrogen as well. We brought him in partially for his expertise around hydrogen storage. So he'll be wonderful as we think about Wyoming specific challenges for hydrogen and opportunities, such as hydrogen can provide us the opportunity to store energy long-term in the subsurface, but that requires research. It is not something that is done today. And so he'll be focused in areas like that. And he's also supporting the Wyoming Energy Authority on their bid, or the state's bid, for the hydrogen hub. So I guess there have been a lot of personnel changes since my last update. But all good things. We're really having smooth transitions in these roles. And some of those centers are, the hydrogen energy is new. So I don't think there's really any changes, except that we didn't have the Nuclear Energy Research Center previously. That was really funded by the Wyoming legislature, launched due to funding. And that is led by Caleb Hill out of chemistry, who's really focused on fuels. And of course, Wyoming being such a big uranium producer, it's important we focus on the fuel side. And then Tara Rigetti, who is focusing on the legal and policy side. Okay, so moving on, just a little update on our work on CCUS, carbon capture, use, and storage, as you are all aware. So Wyoming Carbon Safe project, which is adjacent to Basin Electric's Dry Fork Power Plant, continuing that operation. We do now have 2 wells fully completed to Class 6 standards, and we are going to submit permits to DEQ to convert the actual permits to Class 6. They're not now, where they were Class 1, so we could do interference testing with those wells. One well is to about 8,400 feet, the other is just short of 10,000. So targeting 2 different formations in that area. We've done a lot of baseline monitoring assessments and surveys. So if CO2 were to be injected, that's a very noisy area from a seismic. You know, we have a coal-fired power plant, we have mining, we have trains in the area, so really important to get that baseline data. So that is happening now. We've been doing regulatory work, working on the business case around CCUS, and completing our permits to construct. So I believe we're submitting 12 permits to DEQ. This is interesting. We're submitting them, but we're a university, so the idea is that a commercial project would eventually take those up. So it's a unique role for a university. This is kind of why the School of Energy Resources was created, was get projects as far as we can and then hand off to the commercial sector. So we're working on that. We continue to engage across the state. Those of us that have been working on CCUS for our careers, it's a really exciting time. Industry is engaged. We are actively passing information that's been collected using public dollars to industry and trying to support them in their efforts to build commercial projects, which is really exciting for us. And we're also partnering with industry. There's a number of opportunities under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that could support CCUS projects in Wyoming. We're writing several grants with industry partners right now. So it's an exciting time. So moving on to slide 9. On our coal-related research update, so we have the coal refinery, which creates feedstocks for non-energy projects. And we, again, have moved that out of the labs into the field. We're still doing work on the University of Wyoming campus in Laramie, of course, but we've gotten the technology far enough that we're ready to demonstrate it. And so the pictures you see on the screen, the 2 on the right, are from our demonstration, the demonstration groundbreaking. And then the picture on the bottom left is our coal char brick house. So I think everybody got a coal char brick house, or coal char brick. That was here last time I testified. Happy to get anyone a brick that didn't get one. But that house is still there. It's using first generation bricks. I think we're on second and third generation in the lab now. So collecting data on first generation in Wyoming's, we'll see how the Wyoming winter goes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Where are we on getting the coal char brick into stores? I mean, we had a meeting with Home Depot yet, or where are we on getting that into marketed?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Gray, great question. So we're not ready yet. So we have to test it outdoors. You know, we're going to have to get that data for at least a year before we could market it. So I think it would be hard to market it without proving that it can withstand outdoor conditions. But you know, we're about halfway through our first year of testing. So
Yes. Follow up?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Do we have a marketing plan? I mean, because how we're going to market this and get this out to Home Depot, some of these other folks. I mean, Home Depot has resisted some woke stuff in the past. Maybe they can be an initial, marketer and then spread out to some of the others. I mean, do we have a plan?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Gray, I think we're working on a plan, but more importantly, we're working on a plan to find commercial partners. So I think at the School of Energy Resources, our goal is to collect all the data that a commercial partner could take to a Home Depot. If we have to market ourselves, you know, we can do that, but we're at the end of the day, we're still a university. So, but certainly would be interested in any advice you have. But I do think what we're doing right now is reaching out to potential entities that could market it as commercial vendors instead of us trying to do it ourselves. So.
Senator Rothfuss, did you have a question, comment?
I did, thank you. Dr. Kretka, what about the production scale up? That was something that we talked about last time you were here, that was kind of the next step, is figure out how to increase the daily yield from we make them by hand to we have an automated process. How's that going?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss. So that's kind of the purpose of this demonstration facility. It's one thing to make it by hand because that's as much material as we have. The demonstration facility will be making on a much larger scale. And so that's part of the demonstration process, is to also, it's not just the feedstocks. We're trying to make the products at larger scale. So that is part of this demonstration as well. So, but we have to, so the char bricks specifically are made from the pyrolysis. There's 2 parts, pyrolysis and solvent extraction. The pyrolysis unit is funded, the site prep work is happening, but the construction of the pyrolysis unit hasn't started yet. But as soon, you know, that is all part of this project. So we are actively working on it, but not there yet. Okay.
Senator Brightman?
Dr. Krupke, is the picture of Representative Burkhart photoshopped, or is he actually smiling? Because that's about as rare as a Wolverine sighting.
Yeah.
Or Bigfoot.
Yeah.
That can't be right.
Senator Westberger.
Mr. Chairman, was that an endangered species?
Yes, it is. Back to addressing Representative Gray's question about marketing. The School of Energy Resources isn't a marketing group. They're a research and development group, and then they try to turn it over to somebody commercial that'll market the product. And what we've proven with the char fuel or the char brick is that it is a viable product and can be made, and hopefully some commercial brick person will take it over and market it to, like you say, Home Depot or whoever. So there isn't a marketing plan from University of Wyoming School of Energy Resources.
One other idea, though, would be to partner with someone in the school of business or a student and, you know, have a marketing plan. I think that would be good. I mean, we've invested a lot in this, so thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Okay.
I agree. I actually want to do like a competition or something. So as good as we are at some things, engineers and scientists aren't very good at marketing. So, but I will say it is something we're thinking about all the time. We make sure to collect the information that will be needed. So I agree. I think there are some resources across the university that we could use to develop something, you know, and any way we can to just make it easier for these to get out into the marketplace. So I agree. I think we could. Also, that picture got me hung up yesterday at JAC as well. So, okay, moving on to slide 10, I did want to talk about a new oil and gas focused project that we've launched. We're calling it the Mowry Project. This is relatively new. And so we're in phase 1, which is basically just seed funding. And the Wyoming Energy Authority has funded this work and with support from the governor's office. And basically our goal is to bring together an interdisciplinary team across the University of Wyoming to focus on Wyoming's largest unconventional oil and gas play. There are some real technical challenges associated with the Mowry that we think we can help with. So that's our goal. And so this is a new project that's been kicked off. And then I'm not going to go through any of these in depth, but on slide 11 is a list of the 6 really seed projects that we're funding right now to unlock the Mowry formation. So, and I'm sure this committee knows, so for people listening online, the Mowry really is, it's a huge unconventional play. It underlies most of the state, oil on kind of the mid and eastern part of the state, and then gas on the west. So lots of implications across the state of Wyoming and similar challenges. So.
Mr. Chairman, question.
Question, yes.
Dr. Kricka, considering the size of the Mowry, if you find ways to economically recover that, what's the upside potential? How much oil, gas, if you have an idea?
I do think I have it in my text, but it's, let me follow up. I don't want to give wrong numbers in this setting, but it's very, very large. And it's huge. Let me get that for you because it's really important answer, but I will just say it's worth our time and money to look at the Mowry. And again, it's a good place for the University of Wyoming to play because there are some technical challenges, for example, keeping the fracks open given the amount of clay in that formation. So it's a good place where we can support the sector. So. Okay, so moving on to slide 12, I did want to mention some work we're doing that was a research project focused on CO2 and public works, and that was funded in the last legislature. So essentially, we've focused on CO2 utilization in concrete. CO2 utilization, the big opportunity is enhanced oil recovery. We're already doing that in Wyoming. And of course, more work is always happening to support that sector through the Enhanced Oil Recovery Institute. And we partner with them at the School of Energy Resources all the time. So this is a different way to use CO2. It's not the same order of magnitude as EOR, but there are some advantages. So, and just a couple facts. So the X Prize competition that was here in Calgary, both the winners of the X Prize competition were using CO2 in concrete, quite frankly, because it actually stores the CO2 compared to other products that might degrade over time. So if you make a shoe out of CO2, it would still really not accomplish that much because it doesn't use very much and it would go in a landfill eventually. So, but concrete does hold the CO2 and it's very large scale in application. So we think this is the largest opportunity for CO2 consumption in public works. There are new policy levers and funding opportunities should Wyoming entities choose to go after those. So we'd like to at least put the information out about opportunities through the infrastructure, IIJA, Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, about $2 billion for this kind of thing. So should Wyoming choose to pursue those funds, we'd like to be able to provide the information to stakeholders across the state. And it fits well. The other thing that was part of this study is that we had to look at a CO2 storage hub because if we're trying to use, and we focused on the coal-fired power plants in the state exclusively because that's where most of our CO2 comes from. And that CO2 in concrete probably would, the one coal-fired power plant would saturate that market. But there are some commercial advantages. CO2, when CO2 is used in concrete, it can cure more quickly. So it is a field of interest worth looking at. So if you move to slide 13, just a quick update of what we've done. That legislation, as soon as it passed, we began internal scoping studies. We interviewed several individuals, reached out to industry, and formed a team. So the team has been in touch with WYDOT, Concrete Association of Wyoming, and some major concrete and cement trade associations to get their feedback. And so that study's underway. I don't have a ton of results yet. But we will provide a report by the due date, which is December 1st, to this committee and to Appropriations Committee. And it is really important, if you're trying to use CO2 from a coal-fired power plant, to have an associated CO2 storage hub. Obviously, construction is seasonal, so we have to have another opportunity for the CO2. So moving on, you can keep going. So now the schedule is on slide 15. We will have our internal report done mid-November, and we will have a report to you all. And if you'd like, we can come back and present on that specific topic. We will probably have a little bit of spending past that December 1st deadline, even though our final report will be done, because we want to train some students in this area and also convert it to our report to a peer-reviewed publication. So preliminary conclusions, I do have some on slide 16. We think this is an area of interest. We've had some queries on this, and so we think it's good to at least do this first study and understand what it could mean to Wyoming and what the opportunities are for using CO2 in concrete. It is relatively early stage opportunity. It has technical and economic challenges. And so we always want to remember that the biggest use of CO2 is enhanced oil recovery. And so that and classic saline storage, those are our big CO2 use plays. And then, of course, we have a lot of building blocks for public works in Wyoming, and we already talked about the coal-derived bricks. So we're working on many different sources for building materials in the state. So on slide 17, things that we will continue to evaluate: the amount of CO2 that can be used in this sector for concrete, potential market opportunities. You can't go too far. So in Wyoming, and then exported, and then any opportunities to launch such projects, and we'll report that out. So, okay. And then on my last slide, I only had 30 minutes, so I kind of hit the highlights, but I do want you to know that the School of Energy Resources is really working on almost everything we can think of to support the state of Wyoming and its energy sector. So I just made bullets. So we have several projects focused on rare earth element and critical minerals, of course, super important for national security, for energy technologies. Wyoming does have rare earths, and we are looking particularly at the unconventional sources of rare earths, and really excited about the Rare Element Resources project, and they've been great partners and keeping us updated in how they're doing with that. We also are working with precious metals research. We have several projects on hydrogen and supporting the Wyoming Energy Authority as they advance the hydrogen hub bid funded under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. As always, these energy technologies have to be supported by regulatory and policy analysis, and Wyoming has a lot of specific, with our federal lands, we're always looking at policy issues to help the state. And some of the challenges and the economics associated with federal lands. So for example, if you look at the longer permitting time for wind on federal lands, we just did a study looking at that. And for federal land permit versus private or state land, it takes 4.5 years to get wind permitted. And given that the wind sector does generate revenue to the state of Wyoming, it's a concern that the federal government is really kind of costing us money in that way. We also are working on nuclear. So I already talked about that a little bit. in standing up that Nuclear Energy Research Center. We're supporting some research on wind. We have produced water management, air quality, which has really been the University of Wyoming and particularly the Department of Atmospheric Sciences has partnered with support from the School of Energy Resources, but really partnered with industry to help industry address regulations in especially around the Western natural gas production. So really a true success story of how the university and faculty have supported the energy sector and being able to meet regulations that were imposed. So, and then we also have our visualization center. So,
Mr. Chairman?
Yes. Question, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cooper.
Going back to your produced water management, I've heard some chatter lately and had some questions from a gentleman out of Texas to see if there was any research being done in Wyoming on lithium extraction from produced water. Are we looking at that at all? Do you have somebody involved?
yeah, Mr. Chairman and Senator Cooper, great question. So the School of Energy Resources staff many years ago, probably 7 or 8 years ago, when doing research on CCUS, did find those lithium concentrations. So we did identify those, and yes, so we're aware of it. There's 2 projects at the University of Wyoming. Really, they're not the School of Energy Resources. We just help faculty be aware, and actually Senator Rothfuss and several other of your colleagues helped us find an American-made recovery prize. And there were 2 projects funded by that, looking at lithium identification and recovery. And so, yes, there are projects looking at that. I think the key that you should know is the concentration is about 100 parts per million in that water that would be produced. As a standalone project, it probably is not going to work financially. So it has the anchor project is a CO2 storage project that would create the pressure to have produced water. And then if you're already producing the water, you're going to have to clean it up as you're bringing into the produced water management center. And once you clean it up, that's where you would extract the lithium. So I think we're aware of it, and some of the technologies being developed in that center could be applicable. But really the key for Wyoming unlocking those lithium reserves is the CO2 storage project. So that will just create that pressure. Does that make sense? So that's our #1 focus. And then it seems like there's a number, especially in the southwest part of the state, there's like a number of opportunities that get unlocked by CCUS, whether it's hydrogen or lithium. I mean, there's so much opportunity. And yeah, and by the way, that was in the Rock Springs uplift, those numbers, those percentages I was quoting, which has kind of been the area we're focused on for lithium recovery with CCUS. And we're happy to provide more information anytime. So, yeah. Okay, so moving on to slide 20. I know the legislature set aside some matching funds. We now have a little bit more visibility on what those potentially could be used for and the amount of cost share. So really, we did not have this information a year ago. We just knew that there was going to be a lot of opportunities and that the state could potentially pursue. So we have listed these different programs funded under IIJA, and as I've already said, WEA is leading the Hydrogen Hub, Sarah Fitzgerald from Business Council is leading the DAC Hub, and we're leading the rest of these, and we just listed the cost share. So basically all I wanted to say is we are pursuing these with industry partners, so thanks for taking a leap of faith and putting that money aside. It will be used to drive new projects in the state of Wyoming.
Senator Rothfuss.
Dr. Kritka, on the cost share, we did provide a decent amount of cost share, but you look at some of these projects and they're pretty significant. When do we need to know, for example, if we could bring a substantial amount of additional resources to the DAC Hub or carbon storage and validation, if those projects scale up to become very large projects? Even critical materials has a lot of funding there. Is this something that we should really be trying to provide an opportunity for earmark in the next legislature in the budget? Or I don't want any of these projects to fail because we couldn't get our cost share portion in place in time.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Office. First of all, I want you to know, we always look for cost share elsewhere first and look to, what can we do in kind, what can we do with industry partners? I think, here's the challenge. The answer is yes. I think that, we can always use more, but it's taking a while. So let me just give you a little bit of background. For example, I don't think we'll apply for Carbon Safe Phase 4 until next year. Even though it's open now, they're going to open it every year. They have $2.5 billion for those.
Right.
And the reason is no one actually qualifies for Phase 4 because they're adding in new requirements that weren't required under Phase 3. So it's all this EJ stuff that we weren't asked to do. We have to go back and do it, but we don't have the budget to do it. So it's kind of complicated. So it's going to take us an extra year to do that work and then apply. Now we are doing Phase 3 proposals, but so the answer is yes. I think there's just a lot of opportunity and they are in out years. So as long as you're comfortable with the idea that it wouldn't, be encumbered immediately, I think that's something to realize.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I guess the key is at what point does it start to unlock access to projects? If you can't say we've got a match, then it's really hard to write
Right.
the matching grant proposal. If you can say that there is the availability of that match, and that's kind of the beauty of having the $25 million sitting there, you can actually write grants to it and it's available. I guess that's something to think about. You don't have to commit to anything right now, but when we look at our Craig report and how we want to invest in the future of the state of Wyoming, I think it's reasonable that some of that should be dedicated to these types of projects. So at least contemplating it, beginning the discussions now of what would be a useful unlock for some of these applications that would put us in a competitive position for them.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Office, we'll absolutely do that. I think the money there has already unlocked our ability to write some of these, but it certainly will continue to do so if added to. So, yeah.
Representative Burkhart looks like he has a question.
Thank
got
you,
that look
Mr.
in
Chairman.
his
Yes,
eyes.
I'm even smiling about it. So Dr. Krupka, obviously you can't do all of these. I mean, we obviously can't go after the 2.5 billion CCUS demo money, all of it. And especially a 50% cost share. And I know under these, there are sub projects in that. Which in particular does SCR plan to proceed with or to pursue in funding and what plays to SCR's strengths?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Burkhart, we intend to go after most of these and we can't do it alone, which is why, we have WEA with the hydrogen hub, WBC with the DAC hub, actually EORI doing the CO2 transport feed study. So we're all working together, but we're dividing and conquering. But I would say, to directly answer your question, the top two are SCR's top priorities. They play to not just our strengths, but the state's strengths and the state's needs. So that's what we're focused on, but these are all really important. And so that's why we're working with our partners across the state to try to cover as many of these as possible. I will say the rare earth element demonstration, I think we're gonna be locked out of that one. I can tell more about it offline, I know. But we don't quite have they're really looking for that refining technology. And I don't think we're going to be competitive. And we've been trying to team up with other units. So we're working on it, but we definitely are not going to lead on that one, so.
Thank you.
Holly, the hydrogen hub, 8 billion, is that the cost for all 4 states? Or is that just our cost?
So the hydrogen hub, that 8 billion is for 4 hubs. So up to, it's actually, I think they said 7 billion for at least 4 hubs. And that in our case, we have 4 states. So Utah, Wyoming, Colorado, and New Mexico would split whatever funding came from that, so.
Okay.
Okay. So moving to the next slide, and we just want to acknowledge that we've had a tremendous amount of industry support. And we have also some big announcements coming, and just wanted to acknowledge our partners across the state and industry that have been supporting the School of Energy Resources in our research. They've been teaming with us. They are supporting our students. And so industry is very engaged, times are good, and they're investing in the School of Energy Resources and our students. And really, that's all I had, except I did provide on slide 23, the budget request approved by the Energy Resources Council, which it's still very early for all this, but just wanted to let you know that as we look toward the future, our goal is to, if you all choose to fund it, to continue investing in coal, oil and gas in Wyoming, and that's what our requests are, to grow those programs. So, and that's all I have, and really appreciate your attention and your time.
Question, yeah. Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On slide 9, the coal transportation study, what was that?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Gray, so that's a really interesting one. So one of the challenges for Wyoming Coal, obviously you're probably aware that we had a failed bid to get an export port on the West Coast, which was really unfortunate because Wyoming Coal is low ash and low sulfur, and really would have been a positive thing for economies in Asia that would be burning that, but it was blocked by Western states. And so that coal transport study is to look at other opportunities to get coal off the West Coast. So some unconventional ideas, like actually putting it in containers, like shipping containers, and that only works when coal prices are really high. But the beauty of it is that you don't need a bunch of infrastructure. You don't need a whole port. You can just send it through regular shipping channels, like with other containers. And so the investment is much, much lower versus trying to get a whole export port. So that study is nearly complete. And so we basically just looked at like the technology, like how would you do it, make sure that there's no spontaneous combustion, and what are the market opportunities? So.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If that's completed, could you send that?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray, I will, as soon as it's done, we'll make sure you have a copy.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions? Other questions? Other questions of Holly? Thank you, Holly. Thank you for traveling all that distance and coming to see us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Is there any public comment on the school energy resource presentation? Any public comment? Yes. There's a public comment. Come right up, Richard.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee. Richard Garrett, I'm a resident of Wyoming, live in Cheyenne, and I'm just appearing here as a person interested in our state's energy future and our environment, as I know all of you are as well. The School of Energy Resources has historically played a vital role and continues to play a vital role in how our state's energy research and capacity and uses are developed, understood, and implemented in the state. So the legislature's support of the School of Energy Resources has been crucial to its success and will remain crucial, in my opinion. And so I just simply want to thank you as members of the legislature for your support for this important part of the land grant mission of the University of Wyoming. Happy to answer
Questions
any
for
questions.
Mr. Garrett? Any questions?
I would add, Mr. Chairman, Dr. Krutka referred to royalties paid by wind generators on federal lands, and I think expressed a hope that the committee might look in the future into ways how that revenue might be shared with the state as other revenue sources of natural resource production are shared with the state from federal lands. So that might be an interesting point of discussion for the committee to explore in the future.
Yes, I think we have some information coming on that to ask the feds to share if they would.
Sharing is good.
Sharing's
is
good, yeah.
Collaboration is good.
You learned that in
Yeah.
kindergarten.
Did learn that.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr.
All right,
Chairman.
thanks, Richard. Before we let Holly go, she's the second director of the School of Energy Resources that has a worldwide reputation for research and development. They hire a lot of PhD employees and scientists to do this research and development and hopefully turn it over to public and commercialize it. Somebody else can commercialize it. But it's very important that we do this. We started it off with funding it from the legislature. It's still a sideline fund, not in the University of Wyoming budget, but it's its own budget. And that's very important that the legislature keeps funding this. They brought in hundreds of millions of dollars in grants and matching funds to the university and the state of Wyoming. And it's made a huge difference in what our industries know and how they can operate. So thank you, Holly. Thank you for what you do. No public comments online. No public comments in the, we're gonna take a break, and like we say, it's a 10-minute break that'll probably run a little longer. It's 10 till 10 right now, or 10 to 11 right now. We'll reconvene at 11. Thank you. Oh, before we go, this is Representative Ayers' last meeting. Last meeting of the
Along with a few others.
Huh?
Representative Gray.
Oh, that's right. Representative
Mayor
Gray
Wasserberg,
won't be back. who
Representative
else?
Duncan,
Oh,
in
yeah.
honor of it being our last committee meeting, there are cookies out here for everyone.
Oh, yay.
Chairman, in celebration of that, let's make it a 12-minute break. Yeah?
Okay, Representative Gray and Senator Wasberger, congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah. the cookies. That was a wonderful treat for your last meeting. Thank you very much. Carbon capture, and we have Adrian Corliss with us. Okay, Adrian, take it away.
Yeah, so first of all, thanks so much for the invitation. Mr. Chairman and the rest of the committee, I'm glad to be here. I'm Adrian Corliss. I'm the CEO. Are we live or no?
Make sure it's green and start over.
Okay, are we good now? Here we go.
There you go.
Okay, well, again, yeah, Mr. Chairman and the committee, thanks very much for inviting me and letting me introduce you to the company. I'm Adrian Corliss, the CEO and CTO of Carbon Capture, Inc. We'll start maybe in the second slide. First of all, for the purpose of today, I mean, my goal today is to introduce you to the company, introduce you to the concept of direct air capture. It's in the carbon management space. And then, talk a little bit about the opportunity from the market perspective. And, this is a new and nascent market, but it's going to grow to be very big, very fast. And then our particular focus on Wyoming and our reasons for choosing Wyoming as the state in which we want to launch our first projects. So Carbon Capture, Inc., it's a company that's developing a modular approach to direct air capture. So really quickly, direct air capture is an approach to actually have modular machines that strip CO2 out of the atmosphere. So we're actually taking legacy emissions back out of the atmosphere. The reason you do this is that in the goal of getting to net zero by 2050, we're going to need to abate all of the emissions that we can, but we won't get all of them. So in the last decade, there's been companies working on this, but in the last 5 years, there's been now a creation of legislation and a market that's actually making it feasible from an economic point of view to look at tackling that problem of removing CO2 from the atmosphere. So we're a Los Angeles-based company. We are growing pretty quickly, about 50 people. We'll be at 100 in a year from now. Most of our growth right now is on the project side of our business as we set up for our first project, which we'll talk about here in Wyoming. We are focused almost entirely on U.S. projects, and the reason is that particularly with the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law, there's now been a setup in the U.S. for the U.S. to lead the way in carbon removal projects. So for sure, that's where our focus is going to be. So we'll talk a lot about an announcement we've made in early September, which was around our first large project, which will be in the southwest corner of Wyoming. Just a little bit about the history of the company. So next slide. So we're based out of Los Angeles. We were formed about 3 years ago. Like a lot of tech companies, the company spent 3 years really heads down developing some core technology. I joined about a year ago, so I've got a particular background in technology development and commercialization. I had actually ran one of the other firms in this space, in the direct air capture space. It's a Canadian company called Carbon Engineering for a number of years. So a year and a bit ago, I joined this team, moved to California, and right now, again, I'm tasked to build the company up. We've opened new headquarters in downtown Los Angeles. But I think the things that are kind of really important is just all in 2022, the things that have emerged in terms of the IRA and also an emerging marketplace for carbon removal that has actually made this a very attractive business. So next slide. So we put together, again, a growing team, probably without going into the details. Probably the thing that's most important is that we have a lot of skill sets around developing and commercializing technology and deploying it at scale. Also noting that we're starting to build out the executive team around the project side as well too. So we'll talk a lot about this, but direct air capture required a lot of the skill sets and project capabilities that you'll see gas projects. So we are bringing folks in from the oil and gas industry to help lead the projects, particularly the project here in Wyoming. Next slide. So a little bit about market. So in the context of getting to net zero by 2050, the reality is that we can't abate or remove all the emissions from current industry. We need to do everything we can, but we'll still probably fall about 10 gigatons short to get to net zero, and that's where carbon removal technology comes in. It's basically a nascent market, but by 2050, in order to actually achieve this, we're talking about the creation of a carbon removal industry, which is going to rival what today's energy industry is. So it's going to require a really rapid growth of a new industry. And I think, again, that's why I think we're also excited about, the discussions around what are those first projects that are going to anchor where this industry will be located. So there's a couple of things here I think are interesting. There's a big market for carbon removal, but there's also a big market for using atmospheric carbon as a substitute for fossil carbon in things like synthetic aviation fuel. And so in these areas where we're not going to electrify these industries, there is an opportunity also to have a secondary market for atmospheric carbon for use cases. And I heard earlier the discussion around cement. It's another great use case for CO2, but fuels is one that's very, very large. And I think the last thing I'd say here is, again, just in the context of Wyoming, I think Wyoming, for a lot of reasons I think we'll talk about in a second, is extremely well positioned to be a leader here. And it comes down to things like geology. And I know we'll have Robbie talking from Frontier Carbon Solutions in the next talk around what they're doing in terms of the sequestration component of it. But in addition to that, there's also right now, there was a foresight of Wyoming a few years ago to apply for primacy with the EPA to certify Class 6 wells, and that's actually given the state an advantage to move first. That shouldn't be ignored, because right now at the federal level, there's only 3 Class 6 wells that have been approved. They're all related to ethanol plants, and there is right now a backlog of several years to certify new Class 6 wells. So Wyoming has a distinct advantage in terms of being a first mover in this space. So a little bit more, again, these are probably, I don't want to dwell too much on the next slide because I think these are things that Robbie will cover, but Wyoming has excellent geography in terms of permanently storing CO2. And I think the other thing is that Wyoming has a skill set in its existing workforce that is tuned to the kinds of skill sets that we'll need to deploy carbon removal technologies. And I think the other thing is that the nice thing about carbon removal and direct air capture is that we're not tied to any particular emission source. And what we're doing is solving a global problem. So when we remove carbon and sequester it, for example, in Wyoming, we can sell those benefits to anywhere in the world. We are solving a global problem. And so Wyoming, from that perspective, can be thinking about marketing the outputs of these, which is the carbon removal credits, on a global stage.
Question here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Corliss, so looking at this slide, why Wyoming? So I guess those are the 2 main reasons you would pick Wyoming, is our geology, our ability to permit Class 6 wells here in the state, and our workforce.
I think
these are things we've struggled with. That's why I'm asking the question.
Yeah, I think, well, for sure. I mean, that's exactly why we're in Wyoming, and that's why we've announced the project here, is because you had those ingredients that weren't available to us in other states in the U.S.
Because, follow up, Mr. Chairman, so, because Mr. Corliss, my understanding is with the technology that direct air capture is not as efficient at this altitude as it is, say, at sea level or something like that. So those 2 items outweighed that technological difference, correct? Am I right?
It does. In our analysis, it absolutely does.
Okay. Well, and thank you for being here. So.
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Okay, and I think we'll just go to if we can go to the next slide. So let's just going to talk a little bit about Project Bison. So Project Bison, we announced that in early September. A couple key things that are really important. It's to date the largest single DAC project that's been announced globally. It's also the first DAC projects, and by DAC, I'm direct air capture, so apologize if I'm, for that acronym, but direct air capture project that will specifically use Class 6 wells for permanent storage. There are other DAC projects that have been announced that are aligning themselves with Class 2 wells and enhanced oil recovery, but this project is specific to carbon removal and storage. And I think the other thing is that it's the first project that we're approaching this in a scalable way. Talk a little bit about the stages of development, but our goal is to deploy a couple of modules. We'll start in a relatively small way, but by the modular nature of how we're building our systems, we can build that project out over time, and that allows us to manage deployment risks. It allows us to validate the business elements of the project as well. But it means that we can continue to build this project over time. So Project Bison is intended to grow to 5 megatons of removal per year by 2030. And actually, from 2030 onwards, there is absolutely nothing stopping us from continuing to scale out the project in the southwest of Wyoming, because the geology is there, has the capacity to have probably gigatons of capacity stored in those formations. So there's really no end point that stops us from getting larger.
Is it safe to say that these are modules that you can move 1 or 10 in on a site and just continue to expand your system? Are they individual modules? They don't have to be hooked together?
So what we do, the way we've approached this is that a module is represented by a number of reactors in a 40-foot container-sized device. So they can be easily manufactured off-site and shipped into the site. What we'll do is we'll actually arrange a number of those together into what we call a cluster, and that's the sort of the lowest common denominator where they can share common services. And for us, it's somewhere between 9 and 18 modules will be a cluster, and that's the building block that we would expand a project at.
Could those modules be built anywhere? Could they be built in Wyoming?
Absolutely, yeah. And so right now we have our development headquarters in Los Angeles, but we're looking already at where our manufacturing facility will be. And obviously this will represent our market for the first number of years, and it'll be our biggest market, our biggest project for the next 8 to 10 years. So certainly Wyoming as one of the candidates for manufacturing is on our list.
Did I see a couple of questions? Representative Heiner and then Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So relating to that last question, if these are modularized and they are manufactured outside of the state, will there be any sales tax benefit for the state of Wyoming as you bring these modules in?
Yeah, I don't know that I can answer that. These will be purchased by a project entity which will be incorporated in Wyoming. So to the extent that that would imply yes, I think I don't know the tax situation specifically. Sorry.
It's a good question. We'll make sure they are.
Yeah.
Yeah, Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Corliss, are you planning on developing your own Class 6 well, or would this be you'd go to a commercial injector for that?
No, in the Project Bison, we are partnered with Frontier Carbon Solutions, who is, I think, coming up after me to talk about their sequestration project. And I believe that project is intended to gather not just CO2 from our facility, but from other facilities as well.
Mr. Corliss, how many Class 6 wells will you need to reach your $5 million or 5 million ton per year goal?
So again, in terms of the appropriate tons per well, my understanding is typical is around 500,000 tons per well. So that would imply about 10 wells.
Any other questions? Other questions? Other questions? Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So, yeah, if we can go to the next slide, please. So this is just a little bit more about the project itself. And so in this case here, because the project here is actually, as a business, is doing two things. One is that we actually are going to be generating and selling removal credits into the voluntary market. And so there is a market that has emerged in the last couple of years where certain corporations are standing up to pay premium amounts for engineered carbon removal credits. And so that is the part of the business is actually selling those carbon removal credits. And that's to help corporations who've made ESG commitments to get to net zero by certain timeframes to be able to deal with their hard to abate emissions. And so that's part of the industry or part of the business. The second is that the IRA has something called, it has amplified something called 45Q, which is intended for a carbon management industry. And specific to direct air capture, the 45Q has now, in its current form under the IRA, increased the value of the subsidy for removal from $50 a ton to $180 a ton for direct air capture plus sequestration into Class 6 well. And what's important is it also has extended that for projects that are deployed up to 2032 plus another 12 years. So for us, it gives us a long-term stable support mechanism in addition to the sale of the credits that makes the project particularly viable and interesting. And in fact, it's driving us to think about deploying as much as we can between now and 2032, be given again the benefits that are going to accrue to the project.
But Mr. Corliss, you can only sell those carbon removal credits in the US, or can you sell those worldwide?
No, those can be sold worldwide. So that's again going back to this idea that this is a global benefit that's being created when you do atmospheric carbon removal. So it's a little different than if you're dealing with the point source of emission of a local coal-fired power plant. That's a regional benefit, like in terms of who would pay for it.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes. Senator Cooper.
Mr. Corliss, what kind of a footprint are we looking at for this project?
Okay. Yeah, I mean,
it's obviously going to take quite a bit of wind, and is that where you're headed?
So, yeah, so I mean, if you'll bear with me, in 2 slides, I think we even have some specific land numbers. But the answer is that the actual land efficiency of the direct air capture is very high. So, to kind of fast forward a couple of slides, if, at 5 megatons, the total land requirement for the direct air capture is around 100 acres.
I'm sorry?
100 acres.
What about the?
And then the associated renewables would be about 10 times that, but they don't have to be co-located. So the idea, again, on the renewables project development side, they could be in a variety of different locations. And again, we're not going to be a developer of those renewable projects. We'll be partnering and contracting for that power.
Thank you.
You maybe should have been here for an earlier discussion in thinking about purchasing your power from another party. So we'll work on that. We'll work on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I was just whispering over here that I think what he's really going to need is an industrial power zone for this entire project. I wish he were here a little earlier.
Don't fall for it. Don't fall for it.
Well, it sounds like I'm happy to have an after discussion afterwards for sure, because at the end of the day, the direct air capture component of this is. It requires, a fair amount of development on the energy side. And I think there's further opportunities on the utilization side. When you couple direct air capture with a hydrogen hub, for example, then you open up the opportunity for synthetic fuel. So there's lots that you can talk about.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, if we can go to the next slide, please. So this is, again, we mentioned modularity. The reasons that we take a modular approach is that it allows us to go and build a lot of the same thing offsite. And the modularity is just allowing us to think about it in insertions of innovation, on a regular basis. And so unlike building a single very large plant, which has a particular technology that's locked at a particular time, as we roll out Project Bison over the next 6 to 8 years, we'll be able to continue to improve the technology. So as our installed capacity grows, the material or the performance of those units gets better. Second is that we're doing a lot in terms of being very open in the architecture when it comes to the materials and the science that's inside of the capture machine. And so from that perspective, we have university programs across the US and Canada, as well as programs with private labs to continue to upgrade the materials that go into the direct air capture machine. And this is something that I think is important, just that we'll always be open to better materials and continuing to make sure that we're at the cutting edge of the technology platform. Next slide, please. So this is just a little bit about energy. And again, I think I'd say here that the only thing we are really focused on is that we have clean energy. It doesn't have to necessarily be renewable, but it has to be clean. And so from that perspective, even at the front end of what we're doing, the easiest way to get started is likely going to be using oxy-fired heat and power systems that would be also modular in nature. So we can use natural gas. We can actually co-capture the CO2 that's produced and injected into the same class well. And that's a way for us to get started quickly without having to get too deep in or wait for a new renewables project to get online. Obviously, whether it's solar or whether it's wind, obviously Wyoming is better tuned for wind as renewables, or long term whether it's geothermal. And I also obviously there's a case to be made for modular nuclear as well in the long run when this business gets really large in terms of its needs for power, and also to start to cut back on the footprint required for the energy component. The next, I'm just going to talk a little bit about specifically the state benefits. So first of all, for the facility in 2030 at 5 megatons, we've anticipated somewhere greater than 200 permanent jobs will be created at that facility from an operations point of view, plus hundreds of additional jobs that will be ongoing through the construction phase of the project. And the other thing we mentioned earlier is there is the potential to have the manufacturing of the modules also happen in the state. And we're certainly happy to have those conversations as we go through that process in the next 18 months to make that decision. And then the other thing is again, we're already doing a fair bit in terms of public engagement in the state. Definitely we'll be working with the local colleges in terms of making sure that the skill sets that are required, that there's training programs in place to do that. If you go to the next slide. The next slide is just, this is a little bit about where the industry is at. So far there has been not a lot of deployment of direct air capture facilities. Currently the largest plant is been deployed by one of our competitors. It's actually operated in a facility in Iceland. It's only removing about 4,000 tons a year. They're currently upgrading that to be 36,000 tons a year. But if you go to the next slide, this talks to, again, how our project will evolve. So in phase one of the project, we'll be deploying in 2023 and 2024 about 10,000 tons of capacity. It will occupy a space roughly the size of the project in Iceland, so it's just an acre or two. And if we go to the next slide, over the course of these different phases of deployment, in the first phase, we need very little land, so about an acre of land for the direct air capture component. In phase two, where we're going to scale that up to about 200,000 tons per year, the land need goes up to a little less than 5 acres. By 27, 28, when we get the first million tons of capacity installed, we'll be at about 20 acres, and then we'll be 5 times that, or 100 acres at the 5 megaton scale. So the land use specific to the direct air capture component is pretty nominal. Right now, we haven't got the specific sites chosen for phase one through phase four. That's what we're currently doing right now. I didn't mention in the previous slide, but also we have engaged Fluor as our EPC for this project as well too. And so again, we'll be continuing to work through some of the siting considerations, energy considerations, et cetera, over the next 12 months to allow us to be basically breaking ground and having our first equipment on the ground by the end of next year. So I think that's all that I had in terms of presentation materials.
Questions? Yeah. Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I assume this process uses a sorbent or a molecular sieve. What is the longevity of that? How often will you have to change the beds?
Yeah, that's right. So we're in the launch product, we are using a sorbent, it's an amine-based sorbent. It doesn't have finite life. So we're looking at, as we launch this project, we're looking at 1 to 2 years of sorbent life to start stretching out as we get to the later generations of 4 to 5 years. And part of that, again, is the current commercially available sorbents have some limitations, in terms of the durability that we're tackling with the development programs that we have with various universities and industrial labs. And so we have good line of sight to deal with things like oxidation of sorbents and solubility of sorbents that have us with a high degree of confidence in being able to drive that out. But ultimately, the sorbents themselves are a consumable or a component of OpEx for doing direct air capture.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So with the spent sorbents, will that go into the local landfill, or is there some other place where we place that?
There's a couple options there. So no, they'll never be landfilled in the context of in their current form. So we're working with each of the sorbent developers for an end-of-life strategy and recovery program. Some of the interesting sorbents that we're looking at for our second and third generation units are recyclable and they can be regenerated themselves and put back into service. But I think that in the context of disposal, we'll be dealing with that on a case-by-case basis and primarily it's going to be in conjunction with the sorbent manufacturer.
I guess we don't have any more questions. Thank you, and thank you for making the trip up here. We appreciate hearing about your project and we were really excited when we read it in the paper and wanted to get some more details, so.
Yeah, I
thank you very
really,
much.
really appreciate the chance to present the opportunity to you guys, and thanks again.
Yep, thank you. All right, and then you're saying you're going to move on to Frontier Carbon? Ah.
Do our slides up. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to present our firm and talk a bit about carbon sequestration and the work we're doing in Southwest Wyoming. The work Adrian is doing and Carbon Capture Inc. we think is really fascinating, and it really represents the front edge of some neat things for the state of Wyoming. I'm going to take a step back because I think what's really important today, if not more so, is to remember that Wyoming has a robust hydrocarbon-centered
Can
economy.
you go ahead and identify yourself?
Yes, sir. Robbie Rocky, the president of Frontier Carbon Solutions, Mr. Chairman. So we are a carbon storage developer, and just to finish that thought, what Adrian and his team are doing are very interesting. Our core focus, though, is recognizing that carbon management is increasingly a topic for Wyoming's main industries. And our focus is to help those existing industries manage their carbon profile by providing long-term saline storage and to be able to leverage that storage infrastructure for technologies like DAC, for technologies like cement, like Dr. Krutka mentioned. So next slide, please. Behind me is a team of project and reservoir engineers. Many of us have CO2 handling experience as midstreamers or as enhanced oil recovery operators. We also have a team that specializes in carbon markets. So these are the 45Qs, the carbon offset credits, the things Adrian mentioned. These are a bit more esoteric financial pieces, but they do play a part of the project finance. And then we are backed by a firm called Tailwater Capital. Tailwater is a midstream infrastructure firm that invests in predominantly midstream pipeline assets, but also environmental resource assets across the United States. Next slide, please. As a carbon storage developer, we really look for the intersection of large CO2 emissions from hard to abate industries, the right geology for carbon storage, and a regulatory framework that supports these projects. The Green River Basin is home to some of Wyoming's most important industries. I think you guys have heard that a few times this morning. It's also home to very good geology. I know that's been a theme this morning as well. But most importantly, Wyoming, beginning more than a decade ago, has, we believe, the best regulatory framework for CCS development in the United States. Clarity on who owns the pore space, clarity on post-injection liability, the Class 6 primacy. These are things that support projects in Wyoming versus anywhere else, and why we're excited to be here. Next slide, please. As we recognized carbon management becoming more thematic for Wyoming's industries, our team started a little over 2 years ago laying the groundwork for a safe carbon storage hub in Southwest Wyoming. Now, we called it the Sweetwater Carbon Storage Hub. We're not nearly as creative as Adrian and his team, so forgive me, we're all engineers. But we worked closely with the staff at the School of Energy Resources very early on to really refine our geology and where we wanted to develop this asset, closely with the Enhanced Oil Recovery Institute to understand CO2 demand, storage versus making some of that CO2 available for oil fields in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And then began about a year-long effort in coordination with the Wyoming DEQ, the Office of State Lands, and regional stakeholders to develop and submit 3 Class 6 permits to the state. So we submitted 3 Class 6 permits middle of last month. Today, we're on the left side of this chart here. We've permitted about 1.5 million tons of storage, or applied for permits for about 1.5 million tons of storage. We have 2 more permits coming on the heels of that, which should get us to this 2 million tons target by 2024. Next slide, please. So I do want to just step through this graphic and talk a bit about our role as a carbon storage developer, and then a little bit about Class 6 well construction, because it's pretty important. We sit right here in the middle of the graphic. We work with large industrial emitters. We also work with companies like CCI and direct air capture to gather their CO2, compress it, transport it, and then inject it safely downhole. We're responsible for the monitoring, reporting, and verification, and all the post-injection liability until that liability transfers. Class 6 wells are constructed very differently than a traditional oil and gas well. Traditional oil and gas well uses carbon steel for your injection tubing and a lot of your injection casing. Class 6 wells use a chrome blend, which is intended to be effectively corrosion proof. Additionally, the cementing behind pipe, special types of cement, cemented all the way to the surface. These wells are by design constructed so that once you start putting CO2 in them, you don't stop for decades. No well intervention every 2 to 3 years or anything like that. So they're intentionally built to handle long-term CO2 injection. Yeah.
Question here. Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When you're injecting, will you be injecting in a liquid phase or a gas phase? Would it be compression or?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Cooper will inject at a supercritical phase, dense phase CO2. Next slide, please. This may be familiar territory, but there are 6 classes of wells. Wyoming is one of only 2 states with jurisdiction over all of them. Wyoming received its primacy about 2 years ago. And as you've heard this morning, it's an enormous differentiator for getting a project off the ground in this state. That being said, a Class 6 well is still the hardest well to permit in the United States. Very, very comprehensive application, very robust financial responsibilities. Our 3 permits done in coordination with the DEQ run to about 400 pages apiece. We think they represent the most complete permits submitted to date. Next slide, please. So we've spoken a bit about how CO2 injection works, but I just want to briefly highlight the permanence. There is a structural element where your CO2 goes down below your trapping zones, excuse me, in your reservoir, a residual element and a solubility, and then ultimately a mineralization element. So beginning within about 100 years, this CO2 becomes a permanent part of the rock matrix and does not go anywhere else. We have a very good understanding of how the CO2 performs within the reservoir over time. Next slide, please. So I'd like to just briefly highlight some of the progress we've made and reiterate our conviction to bring in this project to Wyoming. As I mentioned, we filed 3 Class 6 permits. That represents about 18 months of work, a substantial amount of capital. We are partnered with Shell and Black & Veatch to develop an economic carbon capture solution for the industry, industrial emitters around here. And then we've partnered with Carbon Capture Inc. to store their CO2. So I think the takeaway here, I hope, is that we've assembled a pretty high caliber class of partners. We are in this for the long haul, and we are committed to bringing this project to Wyoming. And most importantly, we are very close to having one of the first shovel-ready carbon capture projects for the state. Next slide, please. Oh, yes, sir, Chairman.
Mr. Rocky, I think the previous speaker said he needed about 5 wells when he was at total at 200 million tons a year, I guess it was. So your plan is a lot more wells than that because you plan on taking CO2 from other sources.
Mr. Chairman, our focus is to provide infrastructure for industrial emitters, but about 500,000 tons per well. So for Adrian, for 5 million tons would be about 10 wells.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes. Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you're developing this well field and this storage facility, how many acres are you thinking, are you looking at for the total size of the plume? Is it 10,000 acres or 30,000 acres or?
Senator Cooper, it's about 11,000 acres is our initial, in our permit application for those 3 kind of 1.5 million tons, and that's in a single zone. So we would contemplate stacked storage and be able to store, excuse me, ultimately probably 2 million tons within that original kind of 11,000 acres. And then we would work with private landowners to begin to expand that plume in that area.
I'm sorry, you said how big?
About 11,000 acres is our plume outline today between those three wells. We expect that ultimately expands over time as we continue to bring more volumes in.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Senator Cooper.
So you're looking at a combination of federal lands, state lands, fee lands in order to get that done, is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Cooper, we've focused on private lands and Wyoming state lands for our first project. At some point, we will need to include federal lands, but there doesn't exist a very good federal precedent for pore space leasing right now. So we focused on executing out of our first project here and scaling it within the existing bounds of kind of actionable land resource, if you will.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you put together these blocks or these units for the pool, I've heard a number of concerns about getting all of the surface landowners involved and committed to the pore space leasing like this. And it requires quite a large percentage of them to do that. Are you having difficulty with that? Is that something that we need to be aware of as you try to locate these Class 6 wells? You're going to have the agreement of the landowners. So is that something that we need to be aware of that you're having difficulty with?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Heiner, we do a lot of community education on carbon storage and how it works. We began over a year ago with some of the landowners to describe our project, the benefits to the community, and I think it's incumbent on us to do our job to convey that message to them that there is an economic resource and include them in the project. We do recognize there's a high threshold for unitization, but I think we continue to be as transparent as we possible with those landowners on how this project works and then ultimately how it serves the kind of the regional industries in the community.
Yes.
I'm seeing some other applications in other parts of southwest Wyoming for Class 6 wells. Are you planning on replicating in other areas within Wyoming, or is this one place you're going to concentrate on and stay right there?
Representative Heiner, this is our core area. So we have 2 years of work to kind of get to this stage. So I think we're focused here, but we do think Wyoming does have more opportunities as predominantly to the east.
Other questions? Other questions? Okay, go ahead.
Just in conclusion, I'd say that we view carbon capture as responsible industrial infrastructure. It leans heavily on the existing skill sets within the energy community and see it as an opportunity to bring payroll, job growth, property tax growth, additions to civil utilities, and provide another level of economic support to a community like a Rock Springs or a Green River in this area, and that our focus is to be aligned with the community and the region as stakeholders, be stewards of those resources out there, and then just ultimately deliver an economic carbon management solution to those industries.
Yes. Senator Rothfuss.
I'm just curious, as we've looked at the southwestern region and contemplated CCUS, there've been lots of conversations, and Dr. Kretka mentioned it earlier, a little bit about contemplating co-siting with geothermal or lithium separation or even purification of the water, selling the water after you take out the lithium. I mean, trying to bring together synergistic projects that might not be successful on their own, but once you're providing a stimulus with injection of CO2 into the zone, all of a sudden you open some doors for some other possibilities. Have you looked into any of those partnerships, or are you working on developing those? I realize it's probably early, but I was curious if that was something you were exploring.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, we view storage as a transition to a broader utilization opportunity. Fortunately, geologically where we're at, we don't create a need to produce water, unlike on the uplift where that is a bigger concern. Our focus is more on using that high purity CO2, some of it going in the ground, but some of it also helping accelerate, like Adrian mentioned, sustainable aviation fuel, cement, aggregate, some of these other emerging utilization technologies.
I'm looking at your last slide there. You say you're going to do 10 million tons per year. And if your 3 wells require 11,000 acres, I'm assuming that you're about 7 times that amount to, you'd need 20 wells for the 10 million tons. So can I equate that 7 times 11,000 acres is the amount of acreage you're going to need?
Mr. Chairman, it's not a linear relationship.
Oh.
Our first permits target a single zone, the Nugget Formation. The Nugget's about 14,000 feet out here. It's below all the hydrocarbon, very, very far below all the potable water. The Nugget is about a 500-foot thick sandstone. There is another formation, the Madison, below it. There's not enough data right now to characterize the Madison as a stored resource. As part of our permit to construct for our first Class 6 well, we intend to go gather that data and be able to qualify a deeper storage resource. And, you know, in the sense of optimizing land resource and minimizing disturbance, we view this as ultimately a stacked storage development. So 20 wells is a lot. The land position underneath is enormous in that context, but the plumes don't behave in the sense that they just continue to fully expand. They take the shape of an umbrella, if you will. At some point, they begin to drape rather than expand.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Mr. Chairman.
Other question? Yes, Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You talk about injecting into the Madison. Would the limestone dolomite type formations be more attractive to you because of the solubility of them with the CO2, or is that where you're headed with that?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Cooper, it's an excellent point. The Madison does offer some benefits. The porosity is a little more complicated down there. A lot of the work to date has been done on saline sandstones. We understand very well how that CO2 plume expands in a sandstone reservoir. With the data we have in a carbonate, you just need a little more data to be able to accurately model how that plume will behave if you have, you know, a porosity streak going a certain direction, or just to make sure that plume doesn't just sort of run in one direction or another, and that it does maintain that shape, so we can ensure that we have the right monitoring, reporting, and verification in place as part of our permit application.
Very good. Thank you.
Any other questions? Any other questions of Mr. Rocky? No other questions. Thank you, Mr. Rocky. Thank you for joining us. We welcome you to Wyoming and hope your Class 6 well experience is a great one.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Any public comment on carbon capture? Public comment on carbon capture? Any on the Zoom? Nope. We'll close public comment on carbon capture. Thank you very much for your presentations. We'll move right along to Tallgrass Energy.
Good morning, Senators and Representatives. Thank you very much for the time today. It is a beautiful day in Casper, Wyoming, my goodness. While we're pulling up our slides here, I'll introduce myself quickly. My name is Kyle Quackenbush, and that's a real name. I'm the segment president for liquids at Tallgrass Energy. Tallgrass Energy we'll talk a little bit about today about our company. We're going to talk specifically about one of our projects that benefits the state of Wyoming on the CO2 side as well. We'll complement a lot of the work that Mr. Rocky talked about, as well as the development and opportunities in the state. And then we'll spend a little bit of time as well on sequestration specific to our area of Wyoming that we're looking at. And so actually our project is looking at sequestration in a separate area of Wyoming. So it'll be a lot of compliments to what you heard from Mr. Rocky.
What, can you give me a spelling on that, on your first name?
Yes, it's Kyle, K-Y-L-E.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't want to spell that last name.
You know what? It sounds harder than it is.
Yeah.
My whole life it says it's spelled like it sounds, as a matter of fact. Quackenbush.
Q or a K?
A Q. Yeah.
Last of the alphabet.
Yeah. Great. And let me introduce my colleague here as well. Or Jeff, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Chair and Senators and Representatives. Super excited to be here today. So Jeff Schaefer, Senior Director of Origination at Tallgrass, focused on our business development efforts as it pertains to our CO2 opportunities. And mine has one F, and Schaefer, as you can imagine, has about 37 different spellings. So between the F's and E's, bear with me here. Let me pull it up and I'll share my screen.
Great. And Mr. Chairman, while we're pulling that up, if it's okay, if I may request, we've prepared a short slide presentation. If it's okay with you, it'd be helpful to us to maybe save the questions to the end so we can make sure we can move through all the materials. But we'll be able to flip back and forth if that's okay. I think that will allow us to make sure we proceed through everything that we've put together.
I think that's a nice request, but I can tell you, we can't control ourselves sometimes.
And we will accommodate. Great. Well, with that, again, thank you very much for the time. We really appreciate being here and are excited to talk about our company and our projects. So flipping to the next slide, you can see here that, again, we'll kind of move quickly through who Tallgrass Energy is. We are a known operator here in the state of the midstream side, so I'd like you to be able to explain and appreciate our footprint in the state, what we're doing today and where we're headed. And then we'll talk about one of our specific projects, the Trailblazer Conversion Project, is how we're sourcing the CO2 to be stored in the state. And then we'll spend some time talking about CO2 storage. Again, this will be complementary to what Mr. Rocky put together. Shouldn't be redundant, or we'll do our best not to be redundant. And then talk about, in our experience, commercializing projects for CO2 storage, the keys to success. And that's an area where Wyoming has been very progressive, but also just highlight the nature of whether it's policy, commercial, landholder considerations that help these projects to move forward in the state in our view. Great. All right, so here you can see the footprint for Tallgrass Energy. So as we mentioned before, we are a midstream energy company, so predominantly oil and gas pipelines are our main businesses. We have about 850 employees across the country. We operate in 11 states. Wyoming is home to a lot of our operations, and so you can see here we have about $4 million currently that we pay in taxes. We have 144 employees with really good paying jobs here across the state. You can see the footprint that we occupy here. In Wyoming, we have natural gas gathering, so supporting production of the powder and processing. We have a crude oil takeaway pipeline that brings it Powder River Basin production to Cushing, Oklahoma and refinery markets, and then a lot of natural gas infrastructure that supports production here out of the state and brings it to markets across the country. Specifically in Wyoming, so we operate about 9,000 miles of pipeline and about 2,800 miles of pipeline in Wyoming. So again, a very active participant in the state. And what we're talking about here is really what we view as a complement to all of our existing operations that we have today. One thing I did want to highlight too, while not one of them not in Wyoming, we also operate natural gas storage facilities. And so as you think about the projects that we're going to talk about, they're all really an extension of what Tallgrass is already operating and doing today. So natural gas storage, a good corollary for the CO2 sequestration. What we'll talk about is where we're headed, and some of these statistics, obviously, I believe you are familiar with. The Great Plains Institute did a study and talked about the development opportunity in just Wyoming for carbon capture and sequestration, looking at maybe $11 billion worth of investment opportunities in the state. Looking at more than 3,000 project-related jobs and close to 2,000 permanent jobs. And so as we think about the opportunity that's really complementary and not replacing anything that's going on in the state, these are really incremental job opportunities and revenue streams that absent carbon capture wouldn't be available, which we're excited about. Great. So with that, we'll move to...
Question here. Representative Viner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What relation does Blackstone have with Tallgrass? We've heard a lot about Blackstone in relation to ESG lately.
Yeah, thank you, Representative Heiner and Mr. Chairman. Blackstone is actually our owner. And so we are a privately held company. We were publicly traded, and then really as a platform for growth for the Blackstone Infrastructure Fund, they took us private, and now we're their avenue to be able to both support the hydrocarbon business that we have today, so they invest heavily in what we're doing in our traditional oil and gas business, as well as pursue expansion of that business line into the decarbonization space. They're the folks with the money for us. So speaking of the extension of our business lines, we do have a number of decarbonization initiatives going on across the company, many of them centered around Wyoming. So here we're highlighting several of the projects that are out there publicly. So I'll touch on these briefly. For Tallgrass, the areas where we're focusing on decarbonization primarily, again, are really extension of our business lines. And so that's actually utilizing, a number of our projects are hydrogen-based projects, utilizing natural gas, and then capturing and sequestering the CO2 to decarbonize that hydrogen. So that's a big push for the company. And then as a part of that, sorry, I'm really intimate with this microphone. The other side and related to that is carbon capture and storage, many times supporting the hydrogen efforts that we're looking at. And so on the hydrogen side of the equation, we have a few projects out there publicly. We were the recipient of a DOE grant for a study on carbon capture on an autothermal reforming process, so to be able to create hydrogen utilizing natural gas as a feedstock, and studying the technology to and improve carbon capture on that platform. We have a hydrogen project in New Mexico, which is actually converting, there's a retired coal plant down there, and converting that to be able to burn 100% hydrogen. It's a newer generation coal facility. And so that's an exciting project down there. Again, that will also have a carbon capture and storage element to it. And then we participated in a Wyoming Energy Authority funding opportunity with Black Hills for a test hydrogen burn at the Cheyenne Prairie Generating Station. So this is really the tip of the iceberg for a number of projects that we're working on. Specifically to the CO2 side, the Trailblazer project, which we're going to talk about briefly today, is the conversion of a natural gas pipeline, an underutilized natural gas pipeline, to be able to transport CO2 from different emission sources ranging from Wyoming, Colorado to Nebraska, bringing it to a centralized CO2 sequestration hub in Wyoming. This project is one that we applied with along with a number of other firms, and received some funding from the Wyoming Energy Authority to support the Southeast Wyoming Sequestration Hub. So if you think you've heard of this,
You might be the
have.
first speaker I've told to do this, but you need to move that away from you just a little bit.
Yeah. Well, we are happy to precedent set. Is that better?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, great. So why don't we'll move on then and talk about the Trailblazer project specifically.
You're converting some pipelines to use in CO2, but you can't do that in hydrogen, can you? Don't you have to have specific pipelines for hydrogen?
Good question, Mr. Chairman. For hydrogen, the answer is like a classic engineering, it depends. Some hydrogen projects, actually converting pipeline is okay. It's about the metallurgy of that pipeline. So along the Gulf Coast, the hydrogen systems that are there, those used to be crude oil pipelines, as a matter of fact.
Oh.
But they're older, thicker wall pipe with the appropriate metallurgy, such that the issue with hydrogen is embrittlement. And so they're less prone to embrittlement with those thicker wall pipes. So we think there are opportunities for some pipeline conversions. It's less likely, unlikely for most of the newer generation natural gas pipelines that are thinner wall pipe. And so that's when people discuss conversion, that's the area they're talking about. As we think about hydrogen, much of it is based off of, or the majority of it is based off of for-purpose new built hydrogen pipelines to address those safety concerns. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All right, so the Trailblazer, I'm sorry, I'm just really excited to talk to you guys. The Trailblazer Pipeline Project has two facets to it, okay, and I'll try to be succinct here. So Tallgrass, as you saw, operates significant natural gas pipeline infrastructure. We operate two pipelines that are actually in the same pipeline corridor that originally were built for the same purpose, and that's our Trailblazer Pipeline and Rockies Express, okay? On this map here you see in front of you, the red line is the Rockies Express pipeline. That actually runs all the way to Ohio, because for a period of time, we really wanted to get natural gas to the Northeast. And then they found natural gas there, which is exciting. And so the purpose of that pipeline has really changed. The Trailblazer pipeline brings natural gas today out of the production areas in Wyoming, out of the Cheyenne hub, and brings it to markets in Nebraska and other interstate pipelines. Two pipelines that solve the same set of issues. As natural gas development has changed in the state of Wyoming, demand has changed, and as you have had the growth in the Northeast from areas like the Marcellus, we have seen just such significant decrease in utilization. We now have the ability to basically take all the markets that we serve with the Trailblazer pipeline and connect them to the Rockies Express pipeline and continue to meet all the capacity needs and the market needs, and that frees up that 36-inch pipeline for CO2 service. So this project wouldn't be possible without having good solutions to make sure you can meet takeaway market demands and the as well as the needs of our transporters. And so that's a process actually underway with the FERC right now for the abandonment of the pipeline. And as a public process, as part of that abandonment filing, we didn't have any protests from any of our existing shippers on either pipeline because it was very clear that this was excess capacity. So we'll connect the markets that Trailblazer serves. So all of those markets that are coming out of Wyoming will still have access to natural gas from Wyoming. We're just optimizing those two systems. And then the next slide demonstrates the utility of this pipeline corridor. So that purple pipeline on the map is the Trailblazer footprint. So that's as it exists today. That was where it will be the backbone of this CO2 pipeline to be able to transport CO2 from emission sources in Colorado, Nebraska, and Wyoming to our sequestration site in southeast Wyoming. We'll talk about the sequestration here more in a moment. But as you can imagine, because the pipeline was built to serve industrial end users, you're located in proximity to those emission sources. And so now you have the ability to serve them with natural gas as well as handle their CO2. A lot of our customers to start will be ethanol plants. Just economically, that is a pure source of CO2 that's cost effective to be able to capture and transport. But over time, we will be adding, there's coal-fired generation here in the footprint. So we expect that as those costs come down to have opportunities to capture there, as well as new expected emission sources as we're being approached by people that are saying, hey, I need to have a CO2 solution for my industry to be located somewhere. Now that you have that CO2 solution, I would like to co-locate along your pipeline. So it does encourage new industrial development. And just target in service for the pipeline is mid-2024. So something that is really near-term horizon as far as as working in the state of Wyoming for the sequestration. Really the two timelines for us are that FERC abandonment process and the Class 6 process. And one of the areas where, again, Wyoming being as progressive as it has been on the policy side enables us to be in service earlier than other opportunities. And with that, I'll hand it off to Jeff to talk a little bit about our sequestration.
Do you need some Class 6 wells? Are you having to drill some Class 6 wells?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we are, and we will be. So just as Mr. Rocky had mentioned, we are in the process with the DEQ, having our pre-meetings and preparing our applications for the Class 6 process.
Thanks, Kyle. All right, so as you look at the depiction here, it's just more or less highlights the excitement we have with regards to Wyoming. So as you look at the geology, the existing infrastructure, and everything that Wyoming continues to progress from the existing CO2 infrastructure that's already in place, the Wyoming Corridor Initiative that's being progressed, the pre-approved CO2 pipelines, there's a lot of excitement with regards to the existing infrastructure. Alongside of that, a lot of the great work that's already been done from the carbon safe projects that are already happening in the state, there's a lot of knowledge associated with those formations and those basins that can store CO2. So as you look at this, there's a lot of excitement, a lot of capabilities for Wyoming with regards to CO2 projects. As you look at our project specifically in kind of that southeast corner there with the WEA symbol, you know, like Kyle mentioned, we got funding from WEA to be a part and help us with regards to characterizing the reservoir associated with that. And as you can imagine, you know, it's not as if those reservoirs just stop at the state boundary. And so, you know, those same formations progress into, you know, Nebraska and Colorado. But I think that the key piece to all of this and is, you know, Kyle alluded to this, is essentially, you know, the framework, the legislation, the regulatory environment that Wyoming's progressed really is one of the main reasons that we are excited about having our project and our sequestration hub here in Wyoming. So as you're looking at this picture, so from carbon capture and sequestration, one of the key components in all of that is the geology and is the, you know, main staple with regards to that. And so as you look at geology, really the geology and the characteristics of that geology are the items that really tell you what you are capable of storing or sequestering within those formations. So as you look at, you know, three of more of the critical components, you have the pore space, and so, or you know, porosity, I should say. And so that's just how many of those millimeter size holes are in the formation for that CO2 to be held. The second piece of that is the permeability. So as you imagine, you know, how much room is there for that CO2 to expand within the formation?
And then another key component in that is the cap rock or the sealing mechanism that allows for that CO2 to be contained permanently within the surface. So as you look at, our particular project as it pertains to the Southeast Wyoming section, we're targeting the Sundance and Lyons that are, outlined there with the red arrows, significantly below the Earth's surface, so below 8,000 feet. And as you look at that, some of the key characteristics of that is, as we look at this, you're not preventing oil and gas production, you're not preventing development as it pertains to the formations above and below us. And as you can see there, the Niobrara as it pertains to the DJ Basin where we're in, significantly above where we are sequestering or targeting in the Sundance and Lyons. Again, continue coordination with the state and Wyoming Energy Authority as it pertains to the grant funding that we got for developing the Southeast Wyoming Sequestration Hub. So again, just a lot of detail goes into this, and Rocky alluded to it on his project, significant amount of research development as you continue to develop these projects and understand the subsurface. All right, so as you look at monitoring reporting, so as you develop your Class 6 application and the 400 pages of documentation, it alludes to basically Class 6 application is one of the toughest operational permits in the country. And so as I described that, one of the key components in all of that Class 6 application is the monitoring and reporting and verification as it pertains to the MRV plan that goes into that Class 6 application. And so as you continue down the path, you present your MRV plan as part of that Class 6 application. And upon approval of that permit and that MRV plan, there's ongoing monitoring requirements throughout the entire injection phase of the process, along with post-injection. And so there's a significant amount of reporting that's attributed to all of this. And so as you look at on the right there is more or less outlining a lot of the complexity and with regards to the various components that are required. So as you look at the monitoring side of this, you'll have USDW monitoring wells, monitoring the drinking water. You'll have seismic monitoring from the surface. You'll have in-zone monitoring, so actually within the formation. You'll have wells that are above the containment zone to make sure that that CO2 isn't going through your containment threshold. On top of all of that and all of that monitoring, then is the reporting requirements associated with that. So as you're measuring the CO2 and reporting back to the EPA with regards to what you're finding, all of that to show that what you presented and what you intended and how CO2 is behaving below this Earth's surface is exactly how you've seen it. So you have a very robust Class 6 application or permit application that helps to ensure that you are progressing as you intended. Again, I think the last thing, again, just it is the toughest operational permit within the country as we go through this and continue coordination. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Kyle here.
Thank you, Jeff. So one of the things that is important to manage or think about for the projects with CO2 sequestration is that subsurface, footprint, the CO2 plume, and what that is going to be in any area. It's so specific to the geology that in some cases you might have thicker formations, and so the footprint will be smaller. In other cases, either because of the permeability or porosity or just the overall thickness, that plume size can increase. So here, just to degree of magnitude, we wanted to be able to discuss or highlight for the committee, the kind of footprint that we can see as an example in Southeast Wyoming. And so as you look at the injection horizon here, the red and green represent the CO2 plume concentrations over the course of time. And in this particular area, as you're injecting, you're looking at a footprint that's about 2 miles, 4 miles across in total for that CO2 plume. Again, it won't be a perfect circle. It depends on the subsurface geology. And so, one of the areas that is really important is to be able to work with landowners successfully in partnership to be able to acquire that pore space, because you are looking at impacting a significant amount of landowners. Impact means involve, but not surface facilities as an example. And so you are bringing income streams to them in formations that otherwise wouldn't allow them to be able to, or that they wouldn't be valuable to them otherwise. But a lot of the work that is done is working with landowners on, as Mr. Rocky said, landowner education, helping them better understand how this works, alleviating any fears or concerns. But we are working with a lot of landowners in Wyoming. And so it is just important to note that as you move forward with these projects, sometimes people think about that CO2 injection as being highly concentrated. It really does move out over time, and you're involving a lot of different landowners.
Is your Class 6 well just a vertical well?
Good question, Mr. Chairman. In this case, these will be vertical wells, correct? The current procedures that are in place are for vertical injection wells. So we'll highlight a few keys of success as we think about developing projects in Wyoming and other places in the country, and then we can make sure we answer all of your additional questions. So a few things to consider. Some of these will be obvious, but I specialize in obvious things. And so the first is cost-effective CO2 sources for capture. And so it was mentioned briefly about, I think, the IRA bill that was passed. To support carbon capture, you need to have high concentrations of CO2 are going to be more economical to capture. You want to be able to have high utilization of those sources. And so you want something that's going to be running a lot to be able to capture the CO2 because there's such a high fixed cost component to the capture. We are hoping that as you see continued adoption, that the technology costs will decrease with size and scale or technological improvements to make those more cost effective to be able to capture more sources. You need to have sequestration feasibility, goes without saying. So all of the work that we do on our projects on the front end side is all the subsurface work. Proximity to the CO2 and the sequestration site, the greater distance you need to travel, it increases those costs. Trailblazer is a fantastic mousetrap to be able to bring proximity to Wyoming where otherwise that wouldn't exist. And so repurposing infrastructure can be done more cost effectively. Clear regulatory framework is also one of the most important elements. And Wyoming has been such a, so thoughtful in that approach in sequestration, which we appreciate, and it allows us to be able to move forward with projects more quickly for the state. It's a big advantage for the state to create these new income streams and jobs. And then the last one is that surface pore space ownership and support, partnering with landowners, helping them understand the opportunity, helping to alleviate their fears. These are the first agreements of their kind for CO2 storage. In our case, we worked closely with several members of the University of Wyoming to develop a form agreement that can work with landowners that is very fair. We do a lot of right-of-way agreements acquiring pipelines. And so using that as a basis of agreements that we've had really positive feedback with the landowners that we've been working with. But again, you're talking to a lot of landowners. It is rare that you'd have the ability to step in and work with one landowner that could accommodate a CO2 plume. And so it's important and support from the state as well to say that this is a priority in the state. And so that as people are thinking about these opportunities, they're not only thinking about them economically, but also that this is something that they want to see active in the state. So that ends our formal remarks, and would be happy to open up for any questions you have.
Any questions for Mr. Quackenbush or Mr. Schaefer? Any questions? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So it's my understanding right now, this looks like either a landman's nightmare or a landman's dream. I'm not sure which. We'll have to ask our landman here in a little bit, but it's my understanding right now that in order to put a unit together or a pool, you're requiring, the state of Wyoming, you're requiring 80% participation. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Senator, that's correct.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, can I follow up on that, please?
Yes.
Is that feasible? And maybe I'm asking the wrong person. Maybe I should be asking our land guy here, but in my experience with these deals, of course, nobody likes forced pooling, but until they get their first check. But is that something that you'll be required to do in the future? Is quite a bit of forced pooling? Is that where you're headed with this?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Senator, that's a good question. So there's two things. There are a couple ways to look at that particular point. You're right. With the way that the plumes will impact, it is unlikely you'd be able to get every single individual to participate. And it would be a shame for one small landowner, as an example, to hold up an entire project that would benefit all of their neighbors, benefit the state, accomplish all these other goals. And so having some unitization standard established in Wyoming is paramount. That's very important and allows Wyoming to be competitive where some other states don't actually have a unitization statute yet. It will be very hard for them to have CO2 projects. What's an appropriate and fair level for unitization, I think, is a very reasonable conversation to be able to have. There are a couple of precedents out there. Wyoming at 80% is one. Nebraska is at 60%. So there are some, the range of outcomes is no unitization statute to 60% is the one that's, call it, the lowest threshold when you have the majority of landowners. We are out there acquiring the pore space as we speak. So some of these are happening kind of in real time, if that makes sense, to say is 80% a threshold that is clearly workable to be able to get projects done, or are we finding as we're working with landowners that is more challenging? It is true that the lower the threshold, the more quickly you know that you'll be able to move forward with your project. So that is true.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would you say, first of all, two-part thing, this pore space, so the landowner is going to get paid a royalty, if you will, based on the amount of CO2 that's injected into his relative ownership of the unit. Secondly, would you say that the 80% threshold number is going to be restricted to the state of Wyoming and prevent projects from happening?
Okay. Thank you, Senator Cooper, Chairman. So to answer the first question, yes, the way that, we think about the compensation, there will be akin to an injection fee. And so a volumetric injection fee, as the CO2 is injected into the formation, you will generate continued income for those landowners. Several different opportunities on the front end before you're injecting, whether it's annual payments or a front end payment. So that usually is a combination of an initial compensation before injection, and then to your point, ongoing income streams that are tied to the amount of CO2 that's going into those formations or how our agreements are structured. Will the 80% threshold be a limiting factor in Wyoming? These are all happening right now. Again, it's very, very positive that even the 80% threshold has been established and that is there today. I think if there were a lower threshold, that it would allow maybe certain areas to be developed that maybe they won't be. I think it's going to be regionally challenged in certain cases. So it might be that you have a project that's exciting and good geology, but maybe you can only convince, 60% of the landholders to sign up. And then that would challenge that particular project. But we're in the process right now. And so far we've had good engagement from the landowners. But I do think that let me answer it this way. I think you would see more projects in the state if you ended up with a lower threshold is probably the way to say that.
Follow up, Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Based on our quantity of federal lands in Wyoming, what kind of restrictions are you going to see from the federal government as far as placing these plumes underneath federal lands? Even, we got a lot of places where you might have a 40 or an 80 in the middle of a large tract of fee lands. Do you see these federal lands as an issue at all?
Thank you, Senator Cooper and Chairman. That's a good question. So far, our dialogue with the BLM, and we've met with the regional offices here in Wyoming as well as in Washington D.C. Those have been very constructive discussions, is the way I would say that. So because there is broad-based support for CCUS across the aisle, that's actually allowed the BLM to be pretty constructive and progressive in how they're thinking about pore space. Similarly to a private landowner, it's an opportunity for additional income. We're going to formations that aren't going to be producing any reserves, and so it's additional compensation that they wouldn't otherwise be able to monetize. So we're encouraged by the discussions that we've had with the BLM that just like they are eventually releasing minerals and things like that, that they support CCUS more broadly. So we don't expect that to be a challenge. It will be a process, obviously, to work with the BLM, but we're not experiencing any pushback from the BLM that says ideologically they would be opposed to this, which is very important in Wyoming, to your point.
I would think with the current thinking on CCUS and that kind of stuff, they'd be encouraging you, not just a little bit helpful.
Yeah, yes, Mr. Chairman, that's correct. They are excited about these opportunities and supportive of these projects. We interact with them. There is a small piece, we're not in the checkerboard area on the western side of the state. We have like a small track of BLM property in the area that we're injecting. And so we've been working with the BLM there and applied for pore space use of that federal land. So we're helping to blaze the trail with the BLM on the process.
Other questions for Mr. Quackenbush and Mr. Schaefer? Other questions? Other questions? Nope. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you for your project in Wyoming. We look forward to helping you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Public comment on Tallgrass Energy presentation. Public comment. Any public comment? None in the room? Is there any in Zoom? Representative Duncan, were you going to make a comment there? It looked like a comment.
No, I'll just say thank you. This is my last legislative meeting, and it's been a fantastic 4 years, and I appreciate all of you guys on this committee in particular.
Oh, good. We appreciate you on the committee too.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I have one question from Tallgrass. I serve on the Ag Committee, and we talk a lot about state lands and state trust lands. Is there any opportunity for you to put it on state lands?
Thank you, Senator Weisenberger. We think there are opportunities, yes, to be able to work with state lands, and it is a great opportunity for state lands for additional income and infrastructure. So a very good dialogue, and we can't speak highly enough of Wyoming and how thoughtful you are across the different committees and different jurisdictions in the state. And so, yeah, we are encouraged by the dialogue with the state lands folks as well.
You can do the state lands, and maybe we could get you to do a little injection in Yellowstone Park, huh?
We are looking at all the places. We are looking at all the places. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you very much.
No more public comment. We're going to close public comment. Committee, that's the end of our agenda. We've made it in record time. Thank you for all attending, and thank you for your services, ones that are going off the committee. And thank you for all the speakers to making this an enjoyable project. And we look forward to much more economic development in Wyoming. Thank you. Thank you. We are adjourned.